A happy Sunday, Smite fans, and what better way to round out the weekend than with the final day of Week 7 here in the SPL. Dulcet and Goremizer on the desk for you here for set number 1. And Gore, we've had contended sets all throughout the weekend, and the games we have on the slate for today, I think they might ride that same vein.
Yeah, honestly, they are just as close. I mean, you get to see the team that took number 1 kind of by surprise with Sanguine earlier, going up against Rival later, which there's a lot to be discussed in that set, but the first one is probably the one that's toughest for me to call because everybody's been escalating, everyone's been getting better, but SSG and Knights are probably the ones that deserve to be in that conversation the most from the way they've changed when they entered the SPL to where they are right now. Obviously, there's some big talk about around Obey, but these two teams have been putting their nose to the grindstone.
And these matches carry a little extra weight standings-wise. The 1 and 2 teams in the league at the moment, of course, Rival and SSG, playing in separate sets today. So there's a world where if SSG win and Rival lose, we're right back to another tie at the top of the standings. And then, of course, Knights and Sanguine, they're tied in the standings as well. So depending on the results from these games here today, could be some shuffling, could be some equality in the standings depending on the outcomes of these two sets. Both very difficult to call, but don't tell that to the community, at least for match number 1. SSG, 80% of the fan vote, where the Knights pull about 20% coming into it. Two teams, Gore, that enter this matchup on a 3-game win streak, but let's talk about the Knights first. They've won over Obey, Radiance, and E-United for their last 3 wins, and a team that you seem to think has made some serious improvements.
I think a lot of what they had, and this is something they've even addressed, was they could play for 30 minutes. They could keep you on your toes for 30 minutes of gameplay and then throw it all away at the very end there. They'd lose 1 or 2 team fights, and then everything would fall apart. And they've just gotten so much better at securing those late-game fights. And after talking to them over the last couple of weeks, we got, an interview with El Chuckles, I believe, earlier this week, and things like that. I've come to realize that they just were looking at their late-game shot calling and taking that as scrutinous as they possibly could to break it apart. What's going wrong? Why are we making these bad calls? Where are things, the issue? And I think they've figured themselves out. Scary D can zone out like 20 people by himself, and there's only 5 guys on the other team, so you don't need too much presence. I think Cuvo has integrated into this team nicely as well. And we've got Paul, Zap, and Neil kind of holding it down as the other trio, I would argue, for this team. They've got a really strong core. It really was just the shot calling that needed the cleanup.
Yeah, I love that you talk about Scary D as well, because the variety of play we've seen from him, whether it's build the tanky Cullen or whatever it is, zone out a lot of people, build into the Kamazots, just dunk on people the entire game. Flexibility is absolutely there for him. Paul as well, in all of the games they've played, and we'll get into it later on with picks and bans, it's hard to lock this guy down, but that doesn't mean teams won't try to focus him out. Goremizer, you were able to sit down with Paul prior to this big matchup, so let's hear how that conversation went.
Here with Paul from the Pittsburgh Knights, and I just want to know, because you are maybe in a more unique position because it feels like it happens every single game. How does it feel seeing your God pool targeted almost every time the Knights start up a match?
Honestly, I don't know. I honestly didn't even really play Hell in Conquest. I remember it happened season 5. I didn't pick till 4th, and they banned out all the mages I was playing. I didn't really play Hell at the time, and I played Hell, and I went 1-0, and we still lost the game. And then ever since it started just being permanently banned, I'm like, huh? And so, I don't really care. I mean, it's kind of strange. It's kind of just every team bans it. It's really weird.
Well, hey, you've adapted pretty well to it because you've been playing well as it was. And the whole team has gone from stressful games where, 3-game sets that unfortunately at 30 minutes or so would maybe start to slip away from you to now getting to that 30-minute or later point and winning these sets. So what changed? What has the team been working on that went from those kind of stressful game ends to now these winning?
We've just been working on a lot of shot calling and stuff, and just we're just a lot of times in practice we just like you said, we just lose ourselves to the game. It's at 30 minutes or whatever, and yeah, we're just paying attention a lot to that and trying to really trying to fix it in practice. And so yeah.
Well, today you have an interesting matchup because I feel like you're willing to go outside the box, but you're going to be playing up against Dardez, who is also willing to pull out some different picks. Mainly lately, the Hera has kind of been the talk of the town. So how do you adapt to someone who isn't really playing the meta?
I don't know. He's just gonna play his game. I'm gonna play my game. It's gonna be interesting one. Who knows what will happen?
Well, I'm excited to see what picks come through, whether they're the standard Merlin or if we maybe get a taste of the Hebo from you. Either way, it's going to be fun games for you, so good luck in them. And, well, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Always good to hear from Paul, and good confidence going into this matchup. And flipping the script now over to SSG, as I mentioned at the top, another team coming into this game on a 3-game win streak. Sanguine, Renegades, Rival have all been beaten by SSG over SSG's last 3. Dardez was brought up in that interview, Gore. How important do you think the mid lane matchup is going to be today, Dardez against Paul?
I mean, the way I started that interview is the way that I kind of think about it, where it feels like whenever we see Knights in the picks and bans, the other side is filled with 3 or 4 different mages, and I feel like that's something Dardez and some of the other mids haven't had to deal with, and specifically what comes to mind is, well, their 4th top-picked god for SSG. It is that Hera. It's something that Dardez is willing to bring out and plays it just nuttily well, that it's so clean for SSG, and they don't worry about Raijin. They don't worry about Merlin the way that a lot of these others do. Very similar to how Hell and Hebo get banned out for Knights. So I think there's just a lot of importance on this that it's interestingly enough doesn't overlap between the 2 mid laners. So how they play, I think Paul answered it really well, where it's just like however his game goes, however my game goes, that's going to determine a lot in that mid lane.
And I'm really excited as well to watch the matchup between Nikah and Scary D. Look back at Nikah's the last set where he saw him 10-0-13 in game number 1 against Sanguine last time we saw SSG play. And then the last time these 2 teams played, Dardez and Nikah both go undying in game number 3. So, Gore, I think the solo lane, matchups across the board are all going to be close and fun to watch. But I think solo lane, Scary D versus Nikah could potentially carry a little extra weight as well.
I think one of my favorite things that these 2 teams are bringing that other teams maybe are having, they're playing catch up at this point. Everyone so far has been able to bring in like their little flavor pick, but these 2 teams have been the ones that have just been more willing, it feels like, to throw out something that isn't meta, but it works for them, and that's all that really matters. Hebo comes to mind. Amaterasu, even though she's been picked up by a few, has really been owned by the Knights, whereas there's like the Hera and the Kuzenbo there for SSG. I just like that they're thinking outside the box, and they're making it work.
Well, picks and bans, I think, are going to be fun to follow as well, especially where Paul in the mid lane potentially carries a little extra weight. You kind of asked him, what's it like being identified so heavily in the first round of bans? He's like, I don't know. I don't even know if I play Hell all that well, but I think the healing mid laners are going to be important to watch here in this matchup. Obviously, Dardez on the Aphrodite important. Now, Hera, Gore admittedly, didn't necessarily jump immediately to my mind. What's maybe the thought process here for the Knights?
Dardez plays it, and Dardez plays it really well. The best way to deal with it, if you can't think of a good way to counter it, is ban it out so you don't have to figure out a counter for it. It just controls it, and that's one of the things. Dardez, a lot of the games that SSG have won was with this Hera, him having a really good performance there. And while I think there's still a couple other picks that will come through, again, Raijin, Merlin are still top picks for a reason. Aphrodite still a top pick for a reason. I think the focus in the mid lane and trying to control Dardez will slow down the pace of everyone on SSG.
And slowing down Cherio is obviously a pretty good strategy here for the Knights. They're going to take the Kali away. Jormungandr as well banned out by the Knights, so the Knights obviously kind of dipping their toes into 3 different pools there. Let's mitigate maybe the largest threat that we feel from those 3 different roles in SSG. And SSG, potentially similar, potentially different. The Camazotz and the Ullr, both very flexible. But the Merlin as well is taken away. So now we enter this first round of picks. And with the conversation around Paul and how heavily he's going to be banned out, Gore, there's still plenty on the table in that mid lane. And Raijin, he'll come up first.
And it's that conversation of, do you want something that is maybe a quote-unquote comfort pick, something that works for you really well but doesn't work for anybody else, because there's plenty open that Paul can play, Or do you want the thing that, I mean, what, yesterday, the day before, where you've seen Melt Vamana in the right instance? Like, Raijin just helps counter people because he does it the old-fashioned way, right? There's no, oh, hey, he's got insane anti-heal built into his kit or anything like that. He just kills you faster than you can react, which makes him so easy to scoop up first.
King Arthur as well. Remember the massive performance, 10-0-13 from Nikah. That was on King Arthur against Sanguine, so obviously feeling some comfort there. SSG are going to swing for the King Arthur. Jingwei as well now off the board. What do you make of the first two picks for Space Station?
It's a lot of comfort and a lot of, I want to say, easy control that comes through. Jingwei is so safe that in that lane, a little bit of pressure for Zap doesn't always mean a kill, which makes it a little safer over there. And King Arthur is that he can either bully you out, gain a lot of lane pressure, and worst case scenario, he just stalemates the lane. Like, he's not going to be losing too heavily over there unless we see Knights go something insane. It could be that Achilles to try and knock him down a little bit, but they could also throw that into the jungle. And that's something that SSG have that maybe brings in a little more merit as well. They do like to run some unconventional picks in the jungle that could maybe help out this King Arthur a lot more in that lane and just make solo lane maybe more of a battleground than we're going to see out of the duo.
I just draw too many threads maybe back to that first game against Sanguine, but King Arthur Jingwei, first two picks in game one against Sanguine, first two picks here up against the Knights. The first differentiator, though, is Aphrodite in that mid lane, a pick that Dardes has proved time and time again he is very powerful on, so SSG have to be happy she's left up and available for their mid lane.
And what we've seen, like, you go back to yesterday, rushing things like Ratatouille to make sure that her heal gets that extra passive kind of proc to heal even better. You link her to someone like Cherio, who, if you're not going to go Kali, then that means he's going to be playing someone that can be pretty potent early on. And that becomes a duo that is going to dive you and dive you hard. It becomes very difficult, even as a Raijin with some safety, to maintain the level of pressure that you would like to. They're just going to be able to out-damage you. And even with, I would say, comfort picks and strong picks here on the Knights, Aphrodite paired with anybody is going to kind of bully you down.
And Knights have obviously done their homework here as well. Erlang Shen banned out, Pele banned out, was a popular pick for SSG in their previous set. Xing Qin was as well. So the Knights are going to take away a couple potential jungle picks there from Cherio, but the Xing Qin will make its way through as well. We've talked a lot about the SSG side of things, Goremizer. Achilles, presumably for Scary D, and Chernobog there in the long lane. Now a Geb, though. What kind of a vibe does that give you, a Geb and a Chernobog paired together?
Well, Chernobog, again, one of my favorite things about him is the fact that he's global. He has something that can impact everybody. Even if he just goes up and comes down in his ult, it's going to spawn those shadows to affect the team fight elsewhere. Otherwise, he jumps in on it. Now you add in Geb having an anti-crit passive, which a lot of Jingweis go for that kind of like Poison Star build late game, so maybe helping shut that down. The shield helps keep them safe, plus a huge setup ultimate. I think PK they're playing around the team fight is what I'm looking at. And when it comes to late game, I think they're going to be able to control SSG just a little bit better. Though that Xing Qin will definitely give them some shakeups.
It'll be tough to fight through that whirlwind of rage and steel. Robin being hovered now and Robin being locked in. We've already kind of given summary on thoughts on the Knights draft. SSG, what do you think they bring to the table here?
I think the Robin has a lot to prove coming into this, but he's got Aphrodite, who's, again, one of the biggest safety nets that you're going to be able to bring into this. So his potency is going to be there. It's just how much he can pick up early on. SSG, you don't want to wait too long to get ahead in this one, especially if with Robin like trying to keep up. I think Serket's going to be maybe a little more potent in the late game, especially in helping shut down that Aphrodite with the anti-heal on her ult. So you need these picks to kind of snowball early on to make sure that the Knights don't get a solid grip on this within the first 15 minutes.
Remember, the fan votes here, Gore, are 80% SSG, 20% for PK. I think this is a lot closer than maybe some of the votes go. SSG obviously coming into this one a little bit higher in the standings. Two teams on 3-game win streaks. Finch and Aggro, whose is going to break?
Thanks, Dolson and Goremizer on the desk. It is indeed Finch and Aggro as we move into Game 1 between the Knights and Space Station Gaming. And Aggro, to me, this game could be living or dying based on how Dardes plays this Aphrodite throughout entirety of this game here. Do you think he's really the core of how this match goes, or do you see it somewhere else?
100%. He's got to be. Anytime an Aphrodite's on the map, the game is won and lost in her hands. And that's why a lot of teams don't like to put their mid laners on Aphrodite because you have to be super comfortable. It's a totally different playstyle than just about any other mage in the game. It is not one-to-one transition from playing Merlin or Raijin over to Aphrodite, but the payoff is there because this goddess is incredibly strong. Does a lot of damage if you can play her right. Keeps your team alive. Impossible to play against when she gets ahead. She has a lot of benefits, but if she falls behind, if you aren't comfortable on this god, she becomes really not impressive very quickly. So it's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah, I almost thought that they would take this Geb to go along with that Aphrodite. Raffer's been playing it really well lately, but I like this Xing Chen here in this spot as well. What do you think, I suppose, about the relative merits of the Geb or the Xing Chen on this draft here for SSG?
So for the last few games, the whole talking point for me in drafts is Raffer getting one of his priority gods, which is Khepri or Geb. And he doesn't get either of them banned. Neil picks the Geb away, but it was after Raffer already had the Xing Chen.
Yeah.
I think that the Achilles pick is really what dissuaded Spacestation from going for that Khepri pretty early on in the draft. PK pick at top 3, then you don't want to be playing that Scarab's Blessing into the execute that's going to ignore it. I still think that I would have preferred the Khepri even with the execute on the other side because you have the Undying Love there for you. You've got some counterplay to that ultimate. But this is a good sign for Spacestation if Raffer can look as impactful on the Xing Chen as he has on those two defensive gods, because this win streak that Spacestation's on, I credit largely to Raffer's play on these defensive guardians, or rather the fact that I think he's actually contributing, where for a lot of picks this year, I didn't think he really was.
Now this feels like a bit more of a dive-centric pick as Cuba Fred's nearby, blinks in, but can't find the Cobra's Kiss. Nikah evades that one easily. And this feels like the kind of pick that is a bit more in line with the idea that a lot of Aphrodite's value, I think more than people give it credit for, comes from that back-off damage she gets on someone who's diving. That's exactly what Cherio's going to do on this Robin, what Nikah can do with this King Arthur, and even to some small extent Raffer on this Xing Chen, as much as I think I agree that a Geb or a Khepri would have still looked good in this draft, even against the Achilles. Maybe they wanted to try and have something a bit more dive-centric in that support spot.
I mean, back off on your Khepri when they've abducted someone. You don't actually knock them away, but you still get that damage. It certainly... Look, back off's just good on everybody. That's what makes this character really strong. And that's why this Robin pick makes a lot of sense to me as well, because Robin, not exactly the strongest god in the world right now, but with overhead kick and Mystic Rush and back off and Undying Love, that's a lot of boxes you got to check before you get to kill this guy in a skirmish in the mid lane. That's who Dardes is going to be linked to more often than not, if I had to guess. So I think that it's a god that's going to be very difficult to peel away. Mystic Rush into immediate back-off damage, that's 800, 900 damage worth of burst that is pretty hard to deal with. You have to have Aegis up, and you've got to time it. So that's going to be difficult here for Paul and for Zap.
Gives a pretty mean way to start fights for Spacestation, and then you got to consider how much better they're going to be at dragging the fight out than you as well, with that Aphrodite kind of pocket healing everybody back up. So I think it's going to be tough for the Knights to kind of find their window here in this game. They've got a ton of great control tools, though, aggro, and if Scary D can find some executes, maybe that can kind of open this up. We talked about how Spacestation have that dive and sustain potential. What do you think are the Knights' sort of best options with this draft that they've got?
They have to get a lead. I really don't see a way that they win this game if they're down even 2 to 3K at 15, 20 minutes, because this draft for Pittsburgh Knights is really, really solid against not Aphrodite. I think Aphro just negates everything that Serket wants to do if she has her ult up. And I think that there's a big fallacy that Serket is a great counter to Aphro because she has 100% anti-heal on her ultimate. Yeah, but what does Serket need to do? She needs to be able to all-in one target. She needs to be able to 2, then 1 on top of them, and then ult them. Undying Love removes all of that from the equation and just makes it so you just all-in and got no benefit from it, and that really harms this character. Cuvo needs to get ahead. All of PK needs to get ahead if they want to win.
Well, you said you wanted to see the Knights get aggressive. They are on the right side looking for the blue buff invade, even dropping Q Fredzel onto Cheerio to guarantee it. But Cheerio wants to get aggressive, forces the Thunder Crash out from Paul. And he does have some backup coming, but this feels a bit forced from Space Station, a difficult engagement to make work. And correctly, the Knights are able to disengage, but they keep up the pressure so they can look to try and grab this last blue buff in response. The Knights invaded the blue buff on the Order side, and down coming Space Station to invade the blue buff on the other side.
Little surprised that Raffer doesn't decide to use the ult on Neil. Neil only level 4. No CC immunity right there. He's already used the shell on the blink in from Cherry. But Neil did already have those reinforced greaves, so he's awfully tanky. You're going to need to commit Mystic Rush and basically every ability that's up at the time, and probably not worth it for a first blood onto a Geb that's already a little bit behind. And you just open the door to a whole lot of bad things that can happen to you, where you dump your whole kits into the Geb, and then you end up just dying for it on the back end. So it seemed like a pretty decent opportunity, but I like Raffer's decision to play it slower.
And I like the Knights using that aggression. I mean, you talked about all the reasons why they won an early game lead, but aside from that, they've got this Chernabog who can sort of rotate around the map early on and be impactful way before Vote can on this Jing Wei. They are both going a relatively slow start here, both choosing to get that Devourer's Gloves finished as soon as possible before they get Boots online, but even still, Zapman could certainly put his mark on a team fight.
And that's what this Chernabog has been valued for as of late. A lot of teams starting to really like this pick, and for good reason. I think that this pick has been heavily undervalued for Chernabog's entire lifetime in Smite, because global ultimates on Hunters are very, very difficult to deal with, especially instant ones like Chernabog has. It just gets you to every team fight. It's really annoying to deal with on the enemy team, even if he doesn't teleport to you. That slow really can annoy you and make it difficult to team fight through, so I think it's strong.
There's the last breath. Cubo Fred wants Nikah, but Cheerio is here as well. They cannot find the execute as Nico takes Cubo Fred to Camelot to Avalon, but Cubo narrowly avoids death damage. Whipped right by his whiskers, not enough for the kill. Now it's Scary D who's in some trouble, but a good Cataclysm from Neil Ma prevents all the aggression, and this is where Paul could perhaps clean up. Point-blank damage on a Cheerio. 2 ticks get immune, but it's not enough. First Blood comes in for the Knights, and they're still not done battling yet. Scary D still in some trouble as Nikah finds the return kill.
Dardes still has enough mana to keep going a little bit further, but getting lower in that department. Hasn't finished off that Rod of Tahuti quite yet. So jungler for solo, but PK get that first blood. If Space Station can get this blue buff invade, I think I like where they're at, but here comes Zap.
They already got the kill on the Neilmaw though, so even with Zapman showing up, it's still a relatively even fight. Raffer looking for the disengage and does make his way back out of there, so not bad by Space Station at all to find that turnaround there, aggro. Yeah, they gave up first blood, but 2 kills and the blue buff is a pretty good answer back.
Man, it just feels like that's the type of fight where you put Dardes in an impossible position. He rotates over, he has to heal Nikah up because Nikah got really low. A sick Excalibur's Wrath by Nikah, by the way, to time that fatal strike and get himself out of range and make sure that he can't get executed on that CC chain. But so Dardes has to prioritize getting Nikah healthy, but then Cheerio ends up taking too much damage because Cherry thought he was going to be the one on the receiving end of that kiss and the link and the healing and the undying love. Dardes actually hot swaps right on over to Cheerio very quickly and does get that undying love off, but Paul, nice and patient with the taiko drums, still manages to find the first blood. And that's really the only way that you can win a team fight against an Aphrodite like that, is by spreading out your DPS and giving her too many targets to worry about. But that's why this draft for PK concerns me, because it doesn't do that. I mean, you've got Raijin, which will spread damage out well, but Achilles, what does he want to do? Help you get someone low and then execute that one dude. What does Serket want to do? CC chain and do true damage to one dude. And that's all those characters are doing. And so it's really going to be up to Paul to get all this damage, and Zap, all this damage all across the team fight, because 2 of the characters that PK have are really only good at killing one person, and that's exactly what Aphrodite is good against.
We saw that strength there, forcing a lot of commitment from Paul to find that first blood on the backside of the fight. But the Knights clearly are not afraid to get active here in the early game. But look at Space Station sensing some weakness. Raffer aggressive, as are Dardes and Cheerio, and Cubo Fred takes a ton of damage. Back off, did a lot of the work, but it ends up going over to Dardes on this Aphrodite. Cubo Fred has to take another seat in 15 seconds. SSG are the aggressors. They're even invading blue again.
And look, that actually isn't as nearly as much damage as Dardes is going to do later when he finishes his Rod of Tahuti. He actually decides to go for the Chronos Pendant. I wonder if he just had the gold for Chronos only and didn't have enough gold for Rod, or if he really feels like going full CDR right away is something that he likes more. But if memory serves, he's been one that likes to rush the Rod of Tahuti's second item.
This could be a bad fight. I don't think they realize Cheerio has that flank positioning. They might not even need it, though. They get that red buff invade into the Knights, unable to step forward, so there's really no reason for Cheerio to collapse. They just get the pressure they're looking for and make it back out of there. But an interesting discussion, the Rod of Tahuti, and when do you sort of slot it into the builds here. I would say it's a ton of power up front, and I think it's one of those items that almost never feels bad to build if you can build it, so perhaps Darda is just valuing the Chronos Pin and finishing the item a bit sooner.
Yeah, I think that the big thing and why I love it so much for Afro is really twofold. Yes, Rod is going to feel good even if you have to spend all that money, but it's really that you get a huge burst of MP5, which Chronos Pendant still does give you, as now he's going to be under siege from Fred, but he's chilling. He's not dying from that damage. It gives you a whole lot of MP5 and that passive on Rod where it does more damage to targets below 50% health. Well, that also works for healing your teammates that are below 50% health. You get that extra magical power, and that turns a heal that's going to put you at 2/3 HP to a heal that's going to put you at 90% HP. And that's a huge difference maker for Afro in the mid lane.
Especially in a scenario where, as you said, she knows she's specifically trying to counter all in on one. Cheerio taking the duel up against Zapman, but so far Zapman coming out the better for it. Singe Cheerio basically running for his life, but Zapman still, even with that performance, a good bit behind Vote, who's under siege. It's Cubo Fred who drops some damage on him. Rapper responds with his ultimate, but really isn't able to find anything, but they continue the chase down. Cheerio with that Mystic Rush closes the gap, and Cubo Fred goes down. SSG now have gotten 4 kills in a row.
And look, this is dire already for Pittsburgh Knights, because this is exactly what can't happen to Fred, getting this far behind.
And Vote still trying to battle up against 2. Knows Neoma is low, but Zapman able to find the extra damage there in that 2v1. So Vote, I think, getting a bit caught off guard by the Living Nightmare, ends up getting punished. Now Rapper stuck in no man's land, and again, Neoma will be the bait, and how many will fall prey to that hungry allure? Instead, the kill goes the way of Paul as Rapper drops, and those 2 kills back for the Knights are good, but look at the charts, it really didn't pull things back that much.
No, it didn't, but that's the kind of stuff that just can't happen. Space Station, before those 2 kills in the duo lane, they are like 85% chance to win this game. Like, I think it's that clear that this composition is so much better at beating what PK is going to do, and Cubo's so far behind, he's already taken out of the game, that, like, you just have to not make mistakes, and you're going to win this game. Net worth, I mean, it's basically all red, except for Raffer up top. You are winning every single lane. All you have to do is not make silly mistakes. And PK make 2, or Space Station rather, make 2 silly mistakes. Vote tries to hold his ultimate for some reason and decides to use beads instead, which I mean, he was trying to do the knock up into the dash, then he beads his, but then doesn't want to use the ult and just dies with it up. That makes no sense. And then Raffer decides, well, he doesn't want to be the only, he doesn't want to let Vote be the only one to make a stupid mistake. I might as well throw my hat in the ring and make him feel better that he's got a buddy down here, and just dies for no reason after the fact. And this is what has really held Space Station back in my mind, is these sorts of just plays where I've got nothing for you, Finch. I've been analyzing the game for a while now at this point, and I can't tell you what the thought process is right there, because there isn't a good one in my mind.
Zapman in trouble. Good shield from Neoma prevents a lot of the damage, but this is more about the purple buff invade than anything else. SSG get it and fall back, but you're certainly right, man, to talk about the impact of that. Just look at the experience gap for Zapman, how much that is closed. I know they're still ahead of Cubo Fred with Cheerio, and that's a big deal, but they had another lead brewing over here in the long lane. I feel like they've kind of squandered it. They want to get more aggressive, though. They want to try and fight around Cheerio as they put Poke into Neoma essentially for free. Red buff spawning shortly. They want to be in position for that. Dardes rotating in as well. No beads available for Paul, so he's got to be careful. There's going to all-in commit onto Neil. He makes it to the CC immune part of the ult, and Rapper doesn't find anyone with his ult, and Dardes is suddenly low. Cubo Fred gets the kill. Mystic Rush does get the kill on the Neoma in the back line, so it's 1-for-1, but mid lane for support can't feel good. And now Cheerio is low too. Zapman hides in the wall, and Paul gets the kill before Cheerio can escape. Cubo Fred jumps in, gets knocked up, but Zapman finds the kill, and suddenly the Knights have turned this game around entirely on its head.
Man, just such really, really minute, small plays that PK makes that drag them back into this game, because Dardes does his job pretty much perfectly. knocks away Cuvo as soon as he blinks onto him, does a third of his HP just from back off. But then this decision to stay that spread out, no one wants to be next to Dardes when they know he's going to be the target, but that PK isn't doing great AoE damage. So I think that they need to stack a little bit more on top of him. They're going to get multi-man Cataclysm no matter what in that instance. Dardes' relic usage isn't great. He actually couldn't Aegis at the very end like he was trying to because of a fantastic knockup by Neil. For me so far, Neil has been the one that's turning this game around. His CC has been perfect so far.
Perfect enough to earn a Gold Fury for the Knights. And look at these charts, aggro. Right back to even in terms of gold. They still got a problem with experience. I bet that's still Tyrio and Cubo Fred causing some problems there for the Knights. But other than that, they're in a great spot here now in this game. Now, still, they're at a deficit in the late game, right? Because they're playing an Aphrodite. But instead of Space Station maybe coming into that 20-minute mark with a lock on this game, I feel like that door is still open a crack to where the Knights can certainly poke their head in. As now Space Station pull the Pyromancer. They have it low. Scary D and Neilma both nearby, but SSG burn it quickly, secure the objective.
Yeah, I just feel like, I mean, we see throws at the SPL level all the time. Chad is always, you know, spamming, throwing, Omega Lol or whatever. Yeah, whatever they're going to say. But normally that's a team had a Phoenix down, they were up 10K, something like that. Space Station threw this lead. They really could have put a bow on this game 25 minutes in with the way that it was going, because they had everything going exactly according to their game plan. They've got Robin to snowball in the jungle and put Cubo in a spot where he can't play the game. They've got Nikah, who's free farming on the right-hand side, and he's been dominant on this King Arthur pick. They've got this Dardes Aphrodite that we should just be using all of our Xing Chen peel on whoever's on top of Dardes and make sure that he's staying alive, and just it's all gone now at this point. Now Paul's at a point where he's close enough to Dardes that he can actually be relevant in these team fights. Zap has just done so much on the map in comparison to what Vote has done. 0-2-2 for Vote, 2-0-3 for Zap. I mean, Zap's pretty far ahead in the build as well. I mean, yeah. I just think that so far, it's really just been the duo lane side for PK has done a lot more on influencing this game through the first 18 minutes.
Yep, it is certainly not doom and gloom for Space Station. Not the point we're trying to make. It's just that it feels as though they've made it way harder on themselves than it had to be, right? They did a ton of the work and then kind of undid it. And essentially have reset the state of the game here at this point for them and brought it much closer back towards parity. We're still a while, though, from these big neutral objectives coming up. Pyromancer's down, Fury's down for another 2.5 minutes or so. So there should still be plenty of time for the Knights to kind of farm back up a bit and make sure this next skirmish is more on their terms. But they want votes on this left-hand side. They force the airstrike out from them as well as the beads. And I imagine they'll be back later on to try and collect off that.
It's been a good decision here by Cuvo to try and just farm for a little bit. He's still pretty far behind, but the last thing that you can really afford to do is try and all-in gank. So doing things like that, popping into the left-hand side, blink, ult, immediately back up, stop worrying about it, go back to farming wherever we can. That's kind of what you have to do as a jungler when you're in this position.
A lot of the safety for Vote removed, but still, we're getting towards that 19-minute mark. You know, the laning phase really could start to break down at any moment. It does kind of depend on this side of the map. These solo laners, they've not been tremendously involved in fights outside their lanes just yet, but you got to be worried if you're the Knights for when Nikah starts to rotate over to these team fights and suddenly this full build King Arthur is running around. Scary D does have the Pestilence built, so he'll have plenty of impact himself alongside that Fatal Strike, but once these solo laners start getting involved, that's when this could really start to change.
And no Onk for PK, no Brawler's Beatstick either. It's really just that Pestilence that you mentioned for Scary and the Divine Ruin for Paul. So you're not going to be able to 100% anti-heal Dardes outside of that Last Breath ultimate. And that's something that PK really has to keep in mind, is that no matter what they're doing, unless Cuvo uses his ult, that Aphrodite is going to be helping at least a little bit. This build, by the way, for Dardes, we were talking about it earlier, he's now overcapped on CDR. Don't love that. I think the really valuing that extra mana maybe from the cooldown boots instead of the purple boots. But if you're going to go into the Deso, I feel like just getting that extra power from the Shoes of the Magi is worth your time. But Dardes maybe feeling like he needed that 10% CDR right away, couldn't afford to wait for it at all, and wanted that extra mana that the Shoes of Focus provide.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I don't know if it's that big of a deal as I feel like the community likes to make all the time. When he sells off the Mage's Blessing, he'll be in a comfortable spot at that point. It is just sort of this little bit of inefficiency in the middle of the build that it creates, but I'm right there with you. He must have been trying to make sure that he could maintain that max level as much as possible of that CDR, essentially. Is Cubo Fred in a bit of trouble on the left-hand side? I mentioned that Primal Fury earlier, Aggro. It's back up now. So if the Knights or Space Station are looking to try and step on the gas, this would be a good time. Paul wants to get aggressive. Cataclysm dropped into Dardes. Zatman here, too. And the Tycho drums have to be the big difference maker, but they don't find a lot. Cheerio now diving with a Paul in the back, but he can't stick around. But now that Dardes is out of cooldowns, it's Cubo Fred's time to shine. Drops the last breath on him. There will be no healing, and Dardes somehow barely survives it. That means Cubo Fred's mission is not a success. The Knights have to fully retreat as SSG survive.
But I love the way that PK plays around that Aphrodite, even with the fact that they're going to struggle against it composition wide. Good cleanup kill by Raffer, knowing just how much damage he would do in order to find Cubo right there. But it's Blink Cataclysm, and then wait. Or it's just Cataclysm, it didn't blink. Cataclysm, wait. Then Tycho drums. Then Living Nightmare. I mean, it's just like this constant flow of how that fight has to go. But this is what it happens. I mean, you still expend 4 ultimates, you don't kill him, he resets, comes back, and now his ultimate's going to be back up because the man's overcapped on CDR, and his whole team is much healthier for it, and you have no ults to show. And that is the power of this pick, that even if you do everything really well, which I think that PK did in that instance, sometimes it's just not going to be enough, and that pick's going to beat you.
And if you know that's how the mid-fight's going to go at 22 minutes into the game, then feel free to throw your lives away on the purple buff, I suppose, if you're SSG. But feeling as though maybe they let this one get a little bit closer than it had to be. They'll add the Pyromancer to that nice team fight alongside that mid-tier 1 tower that they've grabbed, and they've reestablished that lead they had earlier on in the game, nearly 3,000 gold out in front. With all the neutral objectives down for now, it's Fire Giant or bust at this point. So SSG, after that little skirmish in mid, might be ready to slow down once more.
SSG is very happy to slow it down because they're just waiting this game out until it gets to the point where it's going to be unstoppable come late game. That's going to be the real breaker, is whenever this Aphrodite gets to the full 6 items. Nearly there on the Charon's coin or the Rod of Tahuti for Dardes as well. Heartseeker nearly done for Cherio. I mean, these are their big power spike items that are going to make the big difference.
I don't think Scary D was expecting this, and Vote's damage is certainly online. Good rotation, though, from Zapman, forces the airstrike defensively out from Vote, and Zap retreats back under the tower, so they keep Scary D alive. But that's great work by Space Station. They basically only give up Vote's ultimate, and they've now got suddenly everybody on the right-hand side of the map, right where you want to be with the Fire Giant is the best objective on the map. They'll take the Tier 1 tower, but there's a skirmish happening in mid. Cheerio thinks he can get this solo kill onto Paul, but Paul has backup. Cubo Fred locks Cherry down and gets the kill with a little bit of help from Neil Moss. So an overstep by SSG in that middle lane on what looked like a good setup.
A really, really good pick there by PK, and just a bad overextension by Cheerio. There's just no reason to fight without your Aphrodite nearby. I mean, you get that kill with Afro next to you every day of the week because back off is the only damage that you would have needed from that health in order to confirm that kill. But Cherry tries to find the 1v1. Paul has help nearby. He bides his time well, buys enough time for Cubo and Neil to come to the rescue.
Yeah, not ideal at all for Space Station, and so the seesaw kind of tips back the other way. Certainly still heavier on the SSG side, right? They've got the Aphrodite, and we're approaching that 25-minute mark, not too far from that real late game starting to kick in, but the Knights still hovering right outside with a chance to maybe come back in and find that win. It slows this game pacing back down a little bit more. And this is kind of, I think, what you meant earlier when you were talking about what's holding this Space Station team back. It feels like they do everything right, and then it's almost like, why continue to play at that top elite level all the time? Or like maybe there's a little bit of boredom and they start looking for some other move. I don't know what it is, because they keep doing all the right things and they have these odd small missteps. And against this current caliber of SPL that the SSG are facing, those will get punished.
They will, and really, I think that this style of team just needs to stick to what they've been really successful with, and yes, that includes odd picks from time to time. That's what they do, but it's really being focused around this 3v3 core and getting ahead right there. And this style of composition really requires you to go late and doesn't let you snowball that 3v3 super effectively because you need time for that Aphrodite to get the ball rolling and get those items online. And so I think that SSG's in a great position to win this game. I think they've won games with the Aphrodite before, but I just don't know that this is my favorite way to watch them play because I think it takes away from their strongest points, which is that winning the early game of that mid 3v3.
I mean, they were there this game despite their somewhat late game nature draft, and it still ended up getting a bit away from them. But I get what you mean. It feels almost like they're kind of playing a little bit outside of their strength zones. You know, I want my Arcanine to be using Flamethrower, right? Even though he might have some other good abilities in the back pocket. So Space Station certainly still in control, as you said, here in this game. And I think that the Knights have done just about everything that they could to try and keep this game quite this close. Is there a little bit more that you'd be wanting to see here from the Knights, or have they largely done about as much as could be asked?
I think they've done pretty well so far. It's really going to be up to Space Station on how they want to punish PK, because come Fire Giant Dance time, full 5-on-5s, that little skirmish we saw in the mid lane a while ago, right before the Gold Fury, where it's Cataclysm into Tycho Drums, into Living Nightmare, into Last Breath. That's sort of pressure Dardes is going to be under if PK want to take him out, which they need to in order to win the game. So it's really going to be up to what what Space Station is going to do with that downtime, because they're going to kill Dardes if they use everything. That's just, unless Dardes plays it absolutely perfectly and there's a little bit of a misplay by PK, Dardes will die, even as Aphrodite, even against this composition. But it's really just how much time is he going to buy, how much damage is he going to get off, and can Space Station actually capitalize on the amount of resources that Pittsburgh Knights are going to need to use in order to kill the Aphrodite alone.
Right, he's basically got to make sure they're paying that Aphrodite tax, and just a question of how expensive can he make it on their way in. So now we're across the 26-minute threshold, a big grouping from the Knights near this next Fury. We're about 20 seconds away from the Primal joining us on the left-hand side, but Fire Giant still looms over in right, and everybody's got enough damage online at this point to be able to burn it quickly. It looks like an all-in crit build from Zapman, Poison Star, Wind Demon, and the Rage, all built from him, whereas Vote merely splashed into it with the Rage and the explosive bolts. So these Hunters certainly doing plenty of backline damage here at this point.
I like the idea for Vote to go with the early Titan's Bane. You look at what Cubo's building. He's got a little bit more protection with that Void Shield. Scary. These are the people that are going to be in his face consistently and trying to dive Dardes. So it's just Vote's job to kill them as fast as possible. Titan's Bane lets you do that. He can splash another crit item late, or he can go with a Chin Size or an Odysseus Bow and find himself in a pretty good position. And for the same reason, I like Zap's build of the full crit. He's going to dive into that back line, and he's got to kill Dardes in as few autos as possible.
Very, very low and controlled by Space Station so far. Ultimate is enough. Space Station able to secure the objective. Can they continue to fight? Zapman in trouble. He's in the grasp of Nikah, brought back down, and still has to ult just to find a way out. Looks like he'll come towards the back end of the fight. There just weren't any safe options, and Vote ends up getting the kill. Paul in trouble in right as well. Aegis buys him a second, but Nikah has plenty of time to wait. A big three-man stun from Scary, but nowhere to go with that fatal strike. Good shockwave from Neilma will buy a little bit more time, but Space Station are unyielding in the late game as they continue to swarm, collapsing onto Scary D and finding their third unanswered kill.
And that's exactly how these team fights are going to go for PK, because this is what this Space Station composition does really well. They are hard to dive. Raffer uses his ultimate as a purely zoning tool to make sure that everyone is staying away from Neil, who's blinking in, which was really, really good to keep those backliners off. A mistake by Paul and Zap to stand so close together. They get double Mystic Rushed, which would just really never happen ever, because you just take too much damage from that. It's really hard to come back from a team fight where both your backliners get double hit by an Assassin ultimate. You see it with Thordunk a lot, not so much with a smaller target or a Mystic Rush, but that amount of space, Paul never got to hit Dardes. Zap never got to hit Dardes until he was 1 HP. And so Dardes, oh yeah, I got Circuit ulted. Okay, I'll beads. I'll ult. I'm alive. my whole team is now invincible because you have nothing left in the tank to kill them with me pocket healing whoever gets low, and we're just going to steamroll you the rest of the team fight. And that's why this composition here for Pittsburgh Knights just scared me so much, because if they get to this point in the game,
yeah,
I don't know what you do differently besides hope that Spacestation makes a mistake.
It's interesting. I almost want to say Spacestation broke the game state twice, right? It's the early game when they got that first convincing win, and then a moment ago around that fight in mid lane, which opened up the gold fear and eventually this FG. But Spacestation have leveraged this Fire Giant well so far, grabbing the Tier 2 tower over in right, opening up the rest of the map a bit more. There's still the Tier 2 in mid and the long lane for them to go grab. I think we saw Cubo Fred do a little bit of split pushing for the Knights. I think he took down that Tier 1 tower in left, or at least pushed the wave up a bit, so that's a little bit more farm back for him. But right now, Spacestation, man, they're feeling so difficult for the Knights to try and find a way to deal with here at this point. That fight around the FG just now, well, it was very clean there from SSG to put themselves into this convincing spot. Now the Knights purely on defense, and they've got Raijin, a strong defensive tool, but it's just a difficult task ahead.
Really love this Winged Blade pickup by Dardes in that 6th item slot, because one of the easiest ways for him to get killed is by getting slowed heavily by Raiju from Paul, where it bounces to him, and then Dardes feels like he has to use a defensive relic or his ultimate in order to get away. Zapman's ultimate's going to proc it as well, and he's going to be using it, so you're going to get that speed boost at some point during the team fight. Think that Winged Blade is really, really smart.
Vote does round out the crit as well. It's a Deathbringer for his 6th slot item, and aside from the Spectral from Scary D, and obviously to get passive, he should be getting a lot of crit value out on just about everyone else. So Cheerio aggressive in mid lane. Meanwhile, in left, the 4-1 split from Spacestation finds a good bit of damage to left side Phoenix, but Cheerio's low. Dardes has to come over to provide him a med pack of sorts, heals him back up, and can put him back out into the battlefield, and SSG can continue to threaten over in left. It's going to be a 2-3 split now.
Dardes here with Cheerio. Those two become a pretty unstoppable force, but it looks like they're going to group up with the rest.
Yeah, and I don't know that the Knights quite fully recognize yet that it's going to be a full 5-on-5 here in left. Good ultimate from Rapper, pushes 2 back, and Paul falls early. They've already grabbed the left side Phoenix as well, and Spacestation at this point can continue to dive in. Good 2-man stun from Scary, slows down the aggression a bit, but SSG really did not have to use a whole lot on the left side Phoenix. They're still plenty equipped to take down this mid Phoenix as well, so Nikah tries to keep Scary D out, but they have locked down Dardes a bit on his own on this left side, but they don't want to commit. Spacestation are still close enough to provide him support.
Doesn't have a linked target though, and I feel like that's where you have to try and really punish him, but Kiss comes up, Dardes decides to surge forward all on his own.
Yeah, they never step on the gas, so Spacestation do it for him. Rapper is in that execute threshold at the back of the fight, but still holding on to it is the Knights. There's the Fatal Strike, but it doesn't find a target. Instead, Nikah is the one collecting skulls, and SSG starting to threaten the game end, but they have to fall back. Too many members of the Knights are up, and they don't feel confident in the damage for now. Vote is way on the front line of the fight. It's a work, and Zapman gets locked down. Cheerio gets the kill. Now it's Neil Ma who's falling into the wood chipper. A 3-man Cataclysm for him will be a swan song, as Spacestation Gaming should be able to collect game number 1. A double for Dardes to seal it.
Like we said yesterday, if you don't have a plan to beat the Afro, you have to ban it if you know the enemy mid laner can play it. And I think that PK, I understand their general game plan. I don't like the Circuit Achilles against it, but I understand that they felt like if we can get a lead, these 2 picks are going to make it impossible for Afro to keep whoever she needs to keep alive really consistently. And that does make sense. But if you get behind at all, even with Spacestation making a pretty critical error and letting you back into the game is just over by that draft, in my mind. So you have to try and find either a better draft. Let's just start banning Afro, fellas. This goddess is just so good. I don't think there's a whole lot of viable game plans to take her down. If I'm up against PK, or if I'm up against SSG right now, or against Renegades, I think I'm just banning Aphrodite every time.
Yeah, Dardes has done enough at this point to prove it to me. Let's see if the rest of the SPL start to agree. I didn't mean to rhyme there. I'll get it down to Dulcin before I get too much like Dr. Seuss.
Thank you, Finch. Happy to bail you out of that one. 32 minutes, an absolute blast to watch. But you know what made it even more fun was the fact that I was building up viewer points that entire time, working towards that Valkyrie Bride Thor skin, the newest Thor skin in-game, and you get them with viewer points for doing what you're doing right now, watching these games. Make sure you go to the esports and live stream tab in-game. check that your accounts are linked. And even outside of the SPO, you can watch any of our rotating streamers and get points there. Valkyrie Bride Thor, though, one of the funniest and through that coolest skins I've seen in game. Goremizer with me to talk about game number 1, though, Gore. And it's maybe a game of throws and counter throws, leads and counter leads, but at the end of the day, it really just seemed like SSG had a composition that maybe moved itself forward there towards the end, especially with an Aphrodite.
Yeah, I think Aggro highlighted it well. SSG's win condition was get to the late game and have Aphrodite, which is pretty easy to do considering they locked in Aphrodite and all they have to do is just not lose very fast. The Knights needed a lot more victories coming through. And, you know, it's the way I was looking at it was kind of like, I wanted to use the term tug of war, but SSG were never really losing it. So it's kind of like if I was in tug of war with The Rock, right? There might be a time that he even lets me pull part of it over to my side and feel like I might win. But at any given moment, he could just flex and win the pull, right? That's kind of how it felt with SSG. At any given moment, they could just take control. It was just, when are you going to stop making these, like, just slightly sloppy engages, right? It never happened consistently. It was never the same thing twice. But every now and then, one of them would get caught out. Maybe Cherio would dive too deep or be in mid lane against 2 or 3 people, and it'd be like, why are you there? What are you doing over there? What was your goal? Like, where was the accomplishment to come out of it? The minute they stopped making those, Knights stopped winning fights.
Well, there was a Geb in this game, so I guess technically there's a tug of war with The Rock going on in game number 1. I am curious, though, Gore. What level of concern are you at? I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. This SSG team is tied for second in the league. Game number 1, I agree with you. Once they kind of clean up some of those mistakes, they look kind of flawless down the stretch of things. What level of concern do you kind of carry around this team, though, that they still potentially make some of those small mistakes?
Honestly, I think it's going to be a threat when you're up against teams, as, again, I think Aggro highlighted, but like you play against rival, you lose a game because you make those mistakes. When you're playing up against, you know, the 5th, 6th, 7th teams, while the gap isn't that large between 1st and 7th, there is still a gap, and so you can maybe afford them, much like we saw here. SSG could afford to make those. The draft saved them a little bit, as well as the play saved them a little bit. But you can't risk to do it too often in a set. I mean, there's only so many times you could slip up against the Knights and have it still work out in your favor. So going into this next one, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Aphrodite gets banned, but I also wouldn't be surprised if those mistakes get punished a little harder by the Knights.
Yeah, the Knights absolutely a team that have been carrying winning ways into this matchup. Every team is going to make small mistakes. It's just we know what SSG are capable of, and maybe that's why it's a big conversation. Now you look forward to game 2, though, Goremizer. Do you think, and kind of levying off the point you bring up, do you think Aphrodite has to be the talk of early pick and bans here? Do you think the Knights need to take her away?
Well, it's that conversation, right? You banned Hera first last time around, which, I mean, based on all the VODs, the highlights, everything I've seen from SSG, yeah, you kind of want to do that. But we just saw what Aphrodite can do and how difficult she is to shut down. So do you want to take her away as well? How much do you invest early on in your bans towards specifically Dardez? Like, is it the Paul effect now, but for SSG, where their mid laner is kind of warranting all of the bans against him? I think you want to maybe put the Aphrodite in there just because of how hard she can win you games. Or if you let her through, you go through with the biggest anti-heal composition, the biggest I want to kill this Aphrodite composition that you possibly can. But try not to give up too much in the process, because if their jungler still pops off, there's not much you can do.
And we also, and kind of, again, to just take a quick look back at game 1, we figured Nikah would play a big role on this King Arthur. Top damage in the game, 22,000 or so is where he ended up. And I think you're also similar to, Dardez on this Afro. I think you're playing with fire the more you kind of let this King Arthur start to roll through here for SSG. So I wonder if maybe Nikah-centric bans start to come out here in game number 2.
Especially considering we didn't get to see Scary D do much that game. I think a lot of what we've seen out of the Knights, especially late game, is, hey, Scary D zoned 2, they killed the other 3, then moved in for the fight, or vice versa with the numbers. He didn't really get to have the Scary D effect this time around. And while there wasn't anything necessarily bad or something to call him out on, it didn't stand out the way that what we've kind of gotten used to seeing out of the Knights. So if the Knights can maybe get him a little more comfortable and maybe keep Nikah down, as you suggest, let that solo laner shine a little bit better, it might make the game just a smidge easier.
And I like the way Finch worded it on the call. Is this game is going to heavily change once the solo laner start to rotate in, and it absolutely did outside of some early fights taken on that side of the map. That's game number 1, though. We're already into picks and bans for game number 2. Another Hera ban, another Kali ban. So the Knights Gore, they're kind of carrying a very similar thread here into picks and bans for game number 2. Is going to be swapped up, though, with Aphrodite taken off the board.
Yeah, I think Jormungandr getting through
Correct.
for that one. So the Knights being able to potentially pick that up for themselves unless SSG decide to ban it out. Or maybe they just know how to deal it. One of the things I was talking about with Jormungandr when I was streaming in the pre-show that I called it, is just the fact that I love that Jorm has so much disruption. There's so much he can do that is so great to have in a fight. And honestly, it feels really good on a Guardian. But at the same time, he doesn't really get to do it until you're in that team fight stage. So for the first 20 minutes of the game, you're just kind of like, yeah, I'm a big snake. That's awesome. Then you start to be able to apply some stuff. And so I think I understand like teams wanting to prioritize it, but also maybe shy away from him slightly as well.
Well, King Arthur, I wondered if the Knights might prioritize him ban or pick-wise, and it is the latter here. So King Arthur locked in for the Knights, and as such, Scary D in the solo lane for themselves. Now, Khepri has been a pick here, not only for SSG, but in the league in general that has started to slightly grow in popularity, and obviously the normal standard cooldown abilities carry some good utility with them, but Gore, so much of what Khepri brings is in the disruption, even just mental, that the ultimate, the res, brings.
That's the biggest thing about it, the res being able to give you essentially a 6th man in your team fight. But so this is a GG button. Pretend it says execute instead. You slam this button as fast as you can because Khepri ult is countered by those executes. If I'm the Knights here, maybe you run the Achilles in the jungle if you feel comfortable doing it, but you look for those executes wherever you can find them to try and shut that down. Otherwise, that is a huge threat. That's part of why Khepri is so much better to pick later on, because you can ban out any executes that are going to be a problem for you, and they don't have time to counter it. I'm wondering if the Knights are going to try to balance it out the way they have right now with sustain, or if they're still going to maybe sneak one of those execute gods in there with them.
Well, I'm smiling because I remember back to the interview you had with Paul where he was like, I don't know why people started banning out Hell against me, and he's going to get a chance maybe to prove it here. So Hell and Jing Wei locked in. You're going to have solo lane, mid lane, carry already off the board here for the Knights. Do you like the Hell pickup?
I do and don't. I feel like she's maybe a little easier to shut down than an Aphrodite in a weird way, because like her sustain affects more, but at the same time, you can pick up things like the Pestilence, like the Contagion, the Cursed Honk, and it feels like it affects her more than it affects something like an Aphrodite, especially considering Aphrodite can cleanse things with her ult. It's a little safer overall. That being said, we've also seen Paul's Hell, and I think I saw chat while that interview was going on, and well, they had question marks for Paul just as much as I kind of did, because it was just like, I've seen your Hell, and I mean, maybe it's not that great to you, but it's really great to the rest of us. So I think it's going to be able to prove its worth here, especially in the team fights.
Always humble is Paul. Now, the Jormungandr didn't get banned out in the first 3, but will make its way into the ban column in the 4th slot here for the Knights. Amaterasu immediately to follow up. So where Nikah has been pivotal for SSG in a lot of their wins, the Knights doing their best to maybe mitigate some of that here for game number 2, but Goremizer and Osiris, I think, still carries a lot of that potential, especially once the rotations start.
And I love Osiris in a composition like this as well, because what does Osiris get to bring on his ult? Again, a little bit anti-heal, but the thing is you can hit anybody, and all of a sudden that stops Hell from being potent with them, right? So maybe makes it a little more difficult for that King Arthur or for this Nike to be able to showcase what they have, because they have that anti-heal coming through. Also, it is just such a lane bully and can slow you away from it. Hell's cleanses are going to be really important, especially with all the CC SSG have. It puts a lot of pressure on the Paul to play perfectly into the late game to make sure that the things don't slip up even slightly.
Well, it looks like the Knights are going to take a bit of a page out of maybe what Sino has brought to the league in the Nike, and I'm going to assume that's Nike in the jungle, and that's a pretty safe assumption here, I think, at this point. Maybe Nike-specific or maybe Warrior-specific in general, Gore. What do you think of this kind of niche meta that we're starting to see form?
It's An interesting one, I think, because you get to see Warriors do what they're kind of meant to do, which is be that flex. They can go super tanky, they can go a little more damaging, and play both sides of the spectrum, and that's exactly what King Arthur and Nikah are going to be able to showcase here. I don't know if you're going to get the same amount of potency out of it as you would any, assassin, but we've seen her work really well in the past, and I think the disruption that Nikah brings, as well as the shielding, is going to make her difficult to kill. There's a lot of sustain on the Knights here, and again, shielding, life ability, I guess is the only way I can think to word it, which will help them keep up with that Khepri res.
Well, let's see if Cuvo Fred can forge the Nikah into victory and get the Knights back into this set in game number 2.
Thanks, Dolson and Gore. Still Finch and aggro here as we move into game number 2. And game 1 was dominated by Dardez's Aphrodite, but the mid laner on the other side has a pretty good back pocket healer pick as well, and that's going to be the hell here for Paul. Just like with that Aphrodite aggro, I'm thinking the way that Paul plays this hell is going to be the focal point of this game.
Every time. It's just these healers, they hold such control over the game. And whether it's you're winning or losing, it can almost always be boiled down to the play of the healer. And that's what I think really puts a lot of people in love with these picks and playing them, and makes other people hate playing against them, is that one player has such agency over the outcome of the game.
Another player is going to have a lot to say this game will be Raffer on the Khepri aggro. For me, he's that sort of the deuteragonist, right? That's that term for the secondary lead in a story. He could be that guy here this time. I feel like they locked this Khepri as soon as they saw the King Arthur come in for the Knights. I wonder if that's because they felt like they no longer had to worry about the Achilles once they picked that King Arthur. And as soon as they could, they got Raffer sort of his signature pick here at this point.
And that's exactly, this is the type of draft I love to see from Spacestation. Everyone's on one of their comfort picks, but Cherio not looking comfortable because he's getting shoved towards the tower. Nike shield, by the way. That does that pretty well, and it cleans up first blood for Pittsburgh Knights.
Yeah, not bad at all there for Cuvo Fred. Got to a good start. He might not be done. Dardez is in some trouble. Cuvo Fred gets another kill, starting the Knights off much better here the second time around.
I tell you what, man, this is the type of fight that you want to take with Nike Hell early on. You just have so much pressure on the map in this 2v2. You just do a lot of damage. You've got a little bit of CC there with the Nike Leap, and that really makes it work. It's just this really easy shove in by Cuvo when Cherry gets a little bit too greedy. And I love Cuvo recognizing that you don't want to collapse that shield for the damage right away. And I think it maybe caught Cherio off guard that he had the shield and the jump, or it caught Dardez off guard that those were the two abilities, because Fred was only level 2 at the time, no Rend available. Must be starting the 2, I would guess, in the jungle, because it's really quick and you can cancel it instantly. But
yeah,
would have thought that, I mean, Rend is the usual ability to clear with and max on Nike in the lane, so maybe the jungle's a little bit different.
That's a great point that might have potentially caught Cherio off guard. But if the shield sort of is the go-to start, because it is, I think, a lot faster to get that damage out than Rend would be, right? It would kind of slow you down a bit. Then it's something Cherio perhaps should be wary of in that same situation. But either way, the Knights off to a much better start here this time. The Hell getting first blood, and then Cuvo Fred getting a kill right after that. Both of them getting an assist because that 2v2 goes so well. And look at this with Paul. He's already sitting on that Cursed Orb, likely going to be moving into a Doom Orb as well. If he's able to get off to a nice start like this, that could be problems for SSG.
Movement speed, so you're not super slow, not that Hell really ever is, because Inspire gives her so much movement speed, but MP5, the big deal here on this Cursed Orb, getting 15 MP5, you add that on to the Mage's Blessing. Paul will still have mana issues, don't get me wrong, but not to the point where he's going to be forced to back before he really wants to in that lane. He can build up a full Doom Orb from here, or Boots 2, whichever direction he really wants to go. But this Cursed Orb gives him so much more momentum in a lane where he gets a kill and an assist early on, where now he can just step up on the wave, zone Dardez out a little bit, and put pressure on just solo killing Dardez by himself.
Cheerio in the underneath position here. We'll just strip away some of this jungle farm, gets away from Cuvo Fred. With only Cuvo Fred here, there should not be a whole lot of kill potential at this point. Cheerio does make it out of there A-okay. But looks like movement speed, excuse me, might be the name of the game here for the Knights. We talked about the Cursed Orb already. The Travelers picked up for Neomah as well. They're trying to move around the map quickly as Raffer rejoins them on the left-hand side. Now, Aggro, we talked a lot about the relative value of these first 2 kills, but how big of a deal is it really for the Knights that that's how they start off this early game? It's certainly not as if Space Station are entirely just blast out of this mid 3v3 contention just off that fight.
No, they aren't, but it is a big deal because it sets Paul ahead and Dardez a little bit behind. And I think that these two are such absolute rock stars in the mid lane. They're dudes who are going to hard carry games for you. Giving one of them an edge over the other is a great start. It gets Cuvo through the point in the game where you feel like maybe it's going to take me a little bit longer to clear. Nike abilities have pretty long cooldowns, 14, 15 seconds on the 1 and the 2. You just don't want to really have to worry about clearing too much. You want to get some extra points so that you can now go out and start doing relevant damage. And Paul gets to finish a Doom Orb super early because of those kills. So I think those actually end up being much more impactful than the stats show.
The red buff invade coming through from the Knights on the Chaos side, stripping that one away. So that is certainly a trackable result from the way that early game fight went for the Knights, right? They have this pressure now on the map where they're able to go take away that red buff. Plus, Cubo Fred has been pretty actively trying to grab those harpies near the jungle shrine on the order side of the map, so Cheerio is not going to be there for those red buff defenses. Cubo Fred takes a lot of damage, but they continue to look for pressure. That's a lot they put in on the Cheerio, but not any real kill potential there, as now the Knights want to look for more jungle to invade.
Why wouldn't they? Zap's got to be careful. Nearly gets double bounced here by Vote. Vote going to force out that airstrike. Decides not to keep on going. Thought he might be trying to read that airstrike, but decides to just take the trade and go home happy.
I'm a bit surprised that he took the safer line there, especially because they should have at least had some information if there wasn't much backup coming, but certainly nothing wrong with this line where he is still A-okay and farming a left-hand side and maybe not potentially throwing his life away. So this is certainly not a misplay or anything like that. There's more aggression in the middle lane, but Dardez evades it well, still has his bead, so even if he does get locked down, he should be A-okay. There has been a lot of pressure, though, from the Knights. They got those early 2 kills, aggro, and they have not slowed down since then.
Paul level 8 now, and really it also lends itself that those early kills to the decision-making in builds. I don't think Paul rushes Doom Orb without having 1,400 gold or whatever it is ready for Cursed Orb on his first back whenever he goes back right away. I think that he probably just goes boost 2, the usual sort of start that's a little bit slower. The way that played out gives Paul the gold and the confidence to just be like, hey, I'm already ahead. I might as well just make sure I'm dealing max damage and really start to punish what PK can do to me or Space Station can do to me in that mid lane. And now that opens up these invades because Paul's clearing better than he would have before. And he has more MP5 than he would have if he had just rushed those boots.
It is indeed the red buff invade. Neomah's already used the flop. The abduct cancels out the belch. And looks like the red buff was defended. Zapman barely gets the airstrike off in time, avoids that last auto, and now Cubo Fred has a vote with no mana, a bit of a sitting duck. Good beats to get away from the slow. But with this rotation coming in, only Raffer can save him. A great Scarab's blessing means that vote will indeed survive, despite him looking to be dead to rights. The Knights have to leave with no kill to speak of.
Really, really smart play there by Zap. It makes you think he's going the wrong way with that airstrike. He forgot to turn his camera around before he pressed 4, but he was really just going towards where his team was coming from, which is where that red buff invade was. Pulls vote back. He's going to go back towards his tower pretty much either way in that instance, but it leads him right into the waiting hands of Cubo Fred, who gets the beads and the Scarab's blessing out. A good play by Raffer to make sure that vote stays alive, but still that's a value play for Pittsburgh Knights. They still get beads and an ultimate.
Well, here's some value from Cheerio. The Mystic Rush on not for the kill, and Paul wasn't able to get the heal, but it doesn't quite matter. Cheerio can't keep up the chase, and Paul manages to survive. Looks like he did have to use the relic there, as I highlighted earlier, but still, Paul survives that pressure from Cheerio in mid.
That would have been truly heartbreaking to see Neil jump over the restore that would have been necessary in order to save the life. I mean, that would have been tough for Paul for sure, but ends up having 20-ish HP enough in order to survive there. But again, Aegis forced. You see the damage output in the early game. Divine Ruin already done now for Dardes. So that damage output's going to be even better now that it's actually shutting down some real healing from Paul. Robin's type of character that just has this all-in potential that overkills you early on. You need every point of that overkill against a Hell at any point.
Red Buff Invade this time will be pretty anticlimactic. Space Station are not in position after that commit. We saw Cheerio on the tier 2 in the pen tree. He finished that off into the Brawler, so the anti-heal is certainly here in that mid 3v3. The Divine Ruin and the Brawlers should be plenty to bring down that kill threshold for the Hell. A little bit more here for Robin and Dardes. As you just mentioned, they already seem to have plenty of kill potential, so that's going to make things a bit easier for them in this short term. As Cubo Fred gets a bit aggressive, the Ren damage is strong. It forces that overhead kick out from Cheerio, but again, able to evade and no real kill potential there.
You see the strength of this Nikah jungle. I mean, he just walks forward, starts channeling Ren, puts out some decent damage across a couple members, and whiffs his jump, and who cares? Because he's still got Sentinel of Zeus if necessary in order to save his life later on. If he would have hit that jump, then Cheerio's in a really bad spot. And this Nikah jungle just kind of does that pressure very well.
Oh, Cheerio's behind, though. This could be a good fight for Space Station if he can capitalize off this positioning. Mystic Rush keeps him close to Paul, and he does better than stay close, gets the kill, and the Scarab's Blessing means he can keep on going for the double. Cubo Fred does push him underneath the tier 1, and allows him to get the return kill, but Dardes makes it a 3-for-1. That's a huge fight for SSG.
That's exactly what the doctor ordered for SSG, and this is where they look their best. It's really centered around these 3v3s in mid. Even when Paul and Cuvo are ahead because of the way that the fight had gone early on in the game, Cherry makes such a smart play and leads with Mystic Rush. And that's not what you see a lot of Robin players do very often because it's not a very confirmable ability. Pretty easy to juke, but remember, it has that Sunder effect. It deals that extra damage, or makes the target that it hits take extra damage for a little bit, and he needed all of it in order to make sure that Paul ended up dying in that 1v1. By that time, the Dardes and Raffer had done good work at poking out Cubo and Neil. They get to clean up both of them after the fact, even at the cost of Cheerio. Just really, really well played by Cherry, Raffer, and Dardes. And that's what's really led Space Station to this 3-game win streak so far these last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it was communication. That initially looked like a wraparound for a collapse, but I think that they kind of recognized they weren't going to be able to add any damage into that dive onto Paul. And when they gave that information to Cheerio, he knows he can leave with Mystic Rush in that spot. Neil Ma, blinking in, drops the Intoxicate, and that does bring Dardes down low. He's at half HP and really low on mana, and that's all in service of setting up for this Gold Fury fight. Vote's nearby, and he does have the Sunbreaker ultimate, but Space Station are zoned out from this fight. The Knights should be able to secure this Gold Fury, but they have to watch out for where Vote is and his ability to find damage. He is zoned out effectively, and the Knights able to grab the Gold Fury.
Love that play from Neil, because it looks just odd. I mean, why would you ever blink Intoxicate someone that you're not going to end up being able to kill in any way? But it just forces Dardes to go back to base. Or, if Dardes wants to stay, Pittsburgh Knights are perfectly fine with that outcome. They get to kill him.
Raffer's in some trouble in mid, has to use Scarab's Blessing on himself, but it does get the revive, and Cheerio again has the dive onto Paul, but this time it goes a lot worse, and they do not have that Scarab's Blessing to bail out these low HP targets. Cubo Fred gets one, and Terry D ends up getting the other. It's Cheerio that falls. The Knights find the perfect answer back. They stretch the map first to set up for the Fury, and then they come back in a collapse on Cheerio when the dive on the Paul happens.
And this time, the big difference is the silver breastplate there for Paul. Working on his Breastplate of Valor, has it tier 2 right now, and that bit of physical protection is the difference maker on that dive from Cheerio. The difference between ending up killing Paul, the sliver of HP left that he had before he could have gotten that heal off, or now Paul living with 200 HP that he's easily able to get that heal off and start turning that engagement in Pittsburgh Knights' favor. Scary D also has a really well-timed rotation into mid to help affect that fight, but really it's the itemization from Paul that makes the big difference there.
Paul getting to that point now where it's going to be hard to try and contend with this hell. And even though they're doing a lot of the right things, Contagion now showing up for Nikah to go along with the Brawlers and the Divine they already have. And Rapper still has another slot if they do want to pick up that Cursed Honk as well. That's not off the table here for SSG, but even still, this is why playing up against these healers is so difficult, Aggro, man. It requires you to play essentially perfect if you're going to find those kills. And even then, sometimes the price can be a bit too great to try and take them out of the fight early on. The Knights now in a really good spot, up nearly 3,000 gold.
And they're the ones who are happy to take this late because they've got Nikah late game, which is really, really potent, not only in the passive that she provides, but she also becomes really hard to kill, as if she's easy to kill right now. And you've got this Hell, of course, in the mid lane that's just going to continue to scale really well. You've got Jing Wei. Pittsburgh Knights really across the board, I feel like, have the stronger late game composition in just about every single role. So the fact that they've got a 3K lead at 15 minutes, they really have to just continue on this train and not let some silly mistakes get in the way of them closing out this game 2 and forcing a game 3.
And it makes me think about these repeated sort of red buff invades the Knights have been looking for. It makes you think about that first 2v2 fight that Cuba, Fred, and Paul were able to win in the middle lane. These sort of small pieces that the Knights were able to find that sort of bridge this gap for them to make it. They're not quite there yet, right, to that true late game where they're going to be like playing around the hell, but they sort of bridged through this early game quite nicely with some of that maybe unexpected aggression and responding to Cheerio very well. Cheerio's dives have worked a couple of times, but for the most part, the Knights have had the answers to deal with this Robin.
And that's the difference between a Robin who has an Aphrodite holding his hand and backing off everyone he goes on to, and one that is just hoping that his base damage alone is enough.
Raffer in trouble, and again has to have the ultimate forced on himself. That's another big difference maker. They've started pressuring this Khepri and taking the Scarab's blessings out of the fights very early on here, Aggro. At least in these last 2 or 3 fights, the Knights have done that pretty deliberately, and that's also made this a lot harder. It's not quite the same as an Aphrodite back off, but it's pretty close having that Scarab's blessing on Cheerio, and they don't get to have that in these last few fights.
It's just the reacquaintance period of playing against a pick that you haven't played against in a while. These picks that kind of resurge and look really, really strong. It's, oh, Khepri, I mean, what do we do? He reses whoever we go on. There's nothing we can do until you think about it. Okay, how did we deal with it back when it was absolutely nuts when Khepri was first released? And, well, no one dealt with it then, but how have we dealt with it in the past in a competitive setting? We focus the Khepri instead and force him to use that Scarab's blessing suboptimally, either on himself or not at all, and try and throw it on another target just to give them movement speed. It also helps that Neil has played a good amount of Khepri so far this year, is comfortable on that pick. I think that having that familiarity on your side also can help you prepare for what the enemy's going to do with it.
Well, speaking of Neil, it's an early Pridwin here for him on the back of that Gauntlet of Thebes. Gauntlet of Thebes for a ton of health up front, and then Pridwin for a ton of prots based off those other prots in the build on the back of that ultimate usage. And that's something that I think Bacchus really likes to use. This feels like an item to me that makes a ton of sense for him because he's already in the back line all the time trying to get back in there and intoxicate a bunch of people.
And he doesn't hurt the extra he doesn't hate the extra damage that's coming out of this. You're right. Dealing pretty solid damage anyways. This is going to add a little bit more CC to the kit, which is never a bad thing. And it seems a little bit early for Pridwin, and it is, but Neil's using this ultimate really aggressively. 20% CDR helps there. And this item's only getting better as the game goes on. It's not like it takes a snapshot of your protections when you buy it, and then those are the only protections it counts on that shield for the rest of the game. Every level that Neil gets, Pridwin gets better. Every item that Neil gets, Pridwin gets better. I think that it's just such a strong item that I have no problem with him getting it this early.
And I think the 20% CDR for Bacchus in particular, like you mentioned, certainly doesn't feel bad. Neil puts that to work with an Intoxicate at the start of the fight, but the dive on the backline from Cheerio is on to Paul. But at this point, I just don't think he can get the work done on his own. That's why Nikah's coming in to pick up the mantle. Lord of the Afterlife for that anti-heal should make this dive a lot stronger, but Nikah's a man on a mission alone, and Paul has 3 members here to back him up. So what's going on in the 4v1 in the back? How are the rest of Space Station not winning it? Finally, Cheerio gets that kill, but Cubo Fred gets another one. Nikah finally succumbs to 3 members worth of pressure, but Zatman's found a kill of his own here too. Space Station cannot make this dive onto Paul work.
I mean, Scary ends up dying, sure, but they only get one member, and that's scary, and they still get Dardes anyways with help from Cuvo, and Paul does his job, survives throughout the entire dive process, and just is able to stay up, stay healthy enough, and start putting out heals, because that's really his sole purpose in this composition. Now, 7,000 healing done already for him. That number's going to get higher pretty quickly as he continues to get more and more power in the build.
Not quite fair, I suppose, to call it a 4v2 there in the back line when Cheerio was the first part of the dive, but Vote is the one that's in trouble now. The knockup is there. A second knockup comes through as he continues to be pushed and slid across the map. It's a kill for Cubo Fred, but Nikah has TP'd back in. Rapper here with the ranged root as well, and suddenly Cubo Fred is in a whole heap of trouble. It's the Khepri Claws that find that last kill there with the auto. Don't get a ton of those, but Rapper is on the board, and Space Station, even though they're up against this hell, even though things haven't been going well, they're finding these small bits and pieces to keep them in this game.
Still, it's just a 1-for-1. Vote uses some relics. Cubo dies, but is going to be able to reset with the team anyways, because that was a slower period. Those 1-for-1 kills, I think, really don't change the course of the game a whole lot, but making sure that Vote doesn't have Aegis for the next Pyromancer fight or left side tower siege, wherever Pittsburgh Knights want to go from here, can be a really big difference maker. So that's the real thing to keep an eye on from that little scrap on the left-hand side. Is does Vote get punished for not having Aegis?
Looks like the Knights are starting to group up on this right-hand side aggro, so I'm trending towards a yes in regards to Vote's ability to be actively in this fight. This Pyromancer already should belong here to the Knights. They're burning it quickly, and no one from SSG are nearby to try and defend, so the consolation prize already belongs to the Order side team. But what about the big guy? What about the Fire Giant? That's what they're really looking for. And Cubo Fred already up in zoning, but Cheerio's damage output, not so bad, even with Oren staring him in the face. That's a good bit of poke he puts onto Cubo. But the Knights have a hell and SSG don't. They start to heal up a bit around that, and suddenly the Knights are ready for yet another fight.
Surprised that Paul went Divine Ruin in this game. Really not a god that you really feel like you have the anti-heal on the other side. Wonder if that's just all he had the gold for, and they wanted to get out on the map as soon as possible and pull that pyro.
A bit of an odd skirmish here in mid. Neoma has already dropped the Intoxicate early as Rapper abducted Cubo to stop his follow-up, but Scary D now here. And suddenly Space Station not in the best position for this fight, but Cubo Fred is low and has already used Sentinel Azu's. Cheerio looking for the dive on the backline yet again, gets the kill onto Cubo Fred. Now Paul is low, they get the kill thanks to both. They drop the Scarab's Blessing onto Nikah so he can keep up this chase. It's a 3-for-1 suddenly in favor of SSG, but just Scary D and Zapman left. Space Station can collect a lot on the back of this.
Just a weird fight selection there by Pittsburgh Knights fans. I don't know why any of that was happening. I didn't feel like that Space Station was wildly out of position. We know that Aegis is down for Vote, but that was really the only defensive relic or ultimate that Pittsburgh Knights could have been capitalizing on. They didn't have such a massive lead that they feel like they can do whatever they want. They had a lead. They still do have a lead. But just an odd series of decisions, and now you lose presence in the mid lane by losing that tier 2. You lose a good portion of that lead, cut nearly in half from 4,000 to 2,500. And now Paul doesn't have relics for this next fight, which if I'm Space Station, I'm forcing, because my carries have their relics and Paul doesn't have his. And Paul, as always with any healer, is the most important player on the map right now.
Said it 22 minutes ago, and it's still true now. Space Station are starting to regroup on the right side of the map around that FG. Rapper does good to get out of there. We don't want anything forced from him, but the good news is I actually don't know how much he had to offer. No sprint, no shell, and no Scarab's Blessing, so maybe he can be a bit cavalier at this point, as Space Station will start up the Fire Giant. Cheerio has tabs on where Cubo Fred is, and the damage is steady to bring the Fire Giant down to half. They continue to hold it as Rapper's in the center, but now they've dropped it. They're looking for the fight instead. Not a lot there as Neil Ma able to avoid with the flop. Space Station still, though, trying to force a bit of a fight.
I mean, look at how far back Paul is. He's not even to back camps quite yet. He was standing all the way near his tier 1 tower where it once stood in the mid lane, but SSG not willing to commit yet.
Was that the abduct from Raffer? I think that's why the all-in commit is here from the Knights. They force the Scarab's Blessing to be used on the Khepri itself, and Dardes takes a ton of damage in the back line. Again, Raffer too far forward and might have cost his team a bit, but they've gotten good damage onto Neil. Perhaps as Space Station can capitalize on this fight. After all, Cheerio wants the dunk onto Paul, who we already covered, doesn't have any relics, and it absolutely works. Paul falls right away. Now it's Nikah's turn to get aggressive. They want Neil Ma in the back, who also is low on CDs. Nikah gets yet another kill. They force Cubo Fred to jump away, who no longer has the Sentinel as Zeus, and the collapse underneath the tier 2 tower can happen. A good Bleak allows Cubo Fred to escape, and SSG not done with this fight yet, but Vote is suddenly in trouble in the back. Scary D is diving on top of the Hou-Yi all alone.
But Zap's right there to support him a little bit. Good crits coming from him. And all of a sudden, the duo lane from Space Station's dead. Nikah soon to be next. No ultimate for him for a little bit. Oh, an odd series of events. Teams just picking bad fights, overextending. And these are two of the hottest teams in the SPL right now, Finch. Neither team has lost since week 4, where they both had double headers and they both went 1-1. So these two teams have looked really good as of late, but I don't know if I would count the last 5 minutes of game 2 in that looking good category.
No, there's been two very odd fight selections in a row, and both teams kind of generously returning the gifts the other one had already exchanged. The Knights still enjoy not only a lead, but they're holding the hell, so they can start this fight up here around the Fire Giant, and Space Station are looking a bit worse for wear. Scary D zones Dardes out, and Cheerio, the only one with steal potential. He's got the Mystic Rush, but now that the Knights know he's here, they're not going to lower it too much, and Dardes, all alone in Tier 2, was never going to survive. So he just looks for the dive onto Zapman and brings him down low, gets the relics out from him, gets the kill too. That's not bad. Even has the Scarab's Blessing so he can come in and die and force that reset, but the Fire Giant's still low. Knights going to do everything they can to all-in commit. Vogue gets the kill onto Scary D, and the Knights do get the Fire Giant, but it doesn't go on to Zapman or to Scary as Cheerio increases the price for that FG.
Still, you get it on Hell, and that's the really important one. I love that identification from Cherry because so much of Space Station's game plan has been to appropriately dive Paul over and over and over and over again, but Zap has been farming these fights really effectively. He was 1-0-5 before that. He's the reason that turnaround underneath the tier 2 on the right side happened really well for PK. And so Cheerio decides, whatever about the hell, man. I'm just going for this Jingwei, and he finds that great 1v3 kill through relics there from Zap. And even though it does mean the Pittsburgh Knights end up getting the Fire Giant, it's not on the Hunter, and as much as you want it on the Hell, you also really want to make sure that your Hunter has it whenever you're pushing those objectives.
A lot of that Siege potential has been taken, and the game's still very close in terms of gold. I don't know that anyone can feel like they're particularly outclassing the other squad in this fight based on the way that the current gold and experience numbers are dropping down. But it is the Knights that are in the driver's seat as long as they've got FG on 3 members. And there's still a lot of towers up to actually extend that gold lead out. But we're 27 minutes in here. I feel like if you're SSG, you got to just defend on Phoenix's ear, or do you like a couple of tier 2 tower defenses?
I mean, it's only a 3K deficit. Do you really want to make it 9K, which is what we would get to with that extra gold, basically, and the map pressure that it would give you? I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be quite 9K, I suppose. You'd be a little bit lower than that, but with the amount of overall gold across the map that you would get going from side to side, waves and such, it'd be around that 10K mark, a little bit closer than what you'd like. I think it's a judgment call, and it looks like Space Station's going to try and go for it.
Yeah, I certainly don't mind at least the idea of a soft defense and not let them grab it for free. See if you can eat away at some of that time on the Fire Giant buff, especially because it's not as if you're against a full 5 stack with the Fire Giant here, right? It's only on Cuvo, Paul, and Neil Ma. So at the very least, showing some presence here seems like a good call. And they're even getting some decent poke, but now Nikah has been slowed and isolated, so he steps back in, realizes he has to take the skirmish, tries to find the quickest path back towards teammates. It works. He makes it out of there, but Neil Ma engages too. Vote has to jump back towards the tier 2. But all the while, Space Station are chewing away at this time on the Fire Giant. Finally, PK regroup underneath the tier 2 and right. And with just Cheerio here, they should at least be able to get this.
But this time that PK has lost is really because of the lack of relics. For Zapman, those just came up off cooldown. Paul's Aegis, I believe it was, or Beads, one of them was down. That is now back up. And that's just an easy way to lose the game is by trying to siege without your carries having relics. It feels bad that you don't get a whole lot out of that Fire Giant. I mean, no kills at all for PK off of that FG. One tier 2 tower. That's certainly not enough for a Fire Giant at 24 minutes, 25 minutes into the game, but that's kind of the hand you're dealt whenever Zapman got his relics forced trying to get that objective in the first place.
So the Knights really don't get that much out of that Fire Giant at all. If you're Space Station Gaming, you've done a great job mitigating it. Really, like you said, off that play from Cheria around the Fire Giant, doing some good work there. So now instead, we'll likely be gearing up for yet another fight here around this Fire Giant. And honestly, the last time I feel like we had a fair fight around the Fire Giant, Space Station actually won it. They just kind of got a little bit overzealous near the tier 2 tower in right and gave some of that lead back. But now that a bit more time has rolled through, now there are a few more items online, all these spectrals for the Knights to mitigate some of this crit damage coming out from Space Station. How favored do you feel like Space Station really are in this next fight?
I really don't think they're that favored because Pittsburgh Knights' composition, I think, is just stronger at this point in the game. And yes, SSG won that last engagement that happened around the Fire Giant as a 5v5, but they won it because Paul had no relics, and he was all in as soon as he stepped up. This time Paul has his relics. He's full build now on the Hell, and if he wasn't fast enough before, now a Winged Blade is going to make him even harder to catch for Cherio. That Prana Onslaught is really just going to zoom Paul out of danger. I think that this is a pretty tough fight for Space Station to win.
To find some kind of way to, without getting punished, force all of those abilities and relics out from Paul, and then find a second wave of initiation once those are down. It's easier said than done, much easier said than done. But the Knights still, just because they're strong against the defense, what does their actual engage look like? Well, against Nikah, it looks strong. He has to use Lord of the Afterlife over the wall, but Cubo Fred drops the Sentinel of Zeus. This is a misplay from Nikah to get isolated alone here on the mid lane, and the Pittsburgh Knights capitalize very well.
Space Station get the pity Pyromancer, but you're not feeling super great about that. Interesting that PK's not looking to just go straight to fire. Instead, they're going to start shoving down this mid lane, maybe even start up a Phoenix Siege in earnest. Maybe just open up the map a little bit, get a little bit of guaranteed gold before heading towards fire. But Nikah does have teleport. I imagine he'll have enough gold to upgrade it before it's time for him to respawn. He does right now. So it's only 30 seconds and he'll be here.
But I think that worked. It forced a full reset of Space Station's positioning. They all backed, essentially, and now the Fire Giant's incredibly low, and only Rappers in range, PK, have gotten the Fire Giant. I think that little play around the Tier 2 might have gotten Space Station to overreact just a little bit. I don't even think they were that wrong to sort of get in position for that Phoenix defense. It just, the Knights were correct to kind of bounce right back towards FG.
Clean little pump fake from Pittsburgh Knights. Move Space Station away from the objective. It's a 4v5, so you're happy if they come and fight you there anyways, but you'd like for them to be a little bit late, a little bit scattered, a little bit, their feet aren't quite set on the defense, so you get to move them around a little bit more, get your free gold anyways, and then end up getting the Fire Giant after the fact. And you called it, Finch. It's just a misposition by Nikah that really costs SSG.
That's right, man. I mean, we said it was going to be a difficult fight anyway, right? Even if Nikah was there in healthy forge. But instead, the fight doesn't even get to happen. Now, Pittsburgh Knights get to kind of dictate where this fight happens. They got a lot of work to do over there in the left. That minion wave was pushed up for Space Station pretty far, so that's why they're grouped up over there in left and pushing that up now. Meanwhile, it looks like the Knights are holding this wave over here in right. I think they want to push everything all at once here, aggro, but look what SFG have done. They've grouped up over here in left and stopped this push from the Knights.
This is smart by SSG. If you see people on the right-hand side and on the left, you may as well group up and see if Pittsburgh Knights will get a little bit lazy, make a mistake, and end up putting themselves out of position. And if you can get a critical pick onto Scary D or to Cuvo or best case scenario on the Paul, then that really stalls out this push from PK. Ultimately doesn't happen, but it doesn't cost SSG anything to try.
Right, it's similar to what the Knights did to Nikah, right? If they could just find someone who's willing to give them a positioning gift, they'll take it. But the Knights weren't quite that unaware. This time it's Raffer who might be getting caught. He finds the back, though. Cuba Fred was very near him and certainly saw he was over on that side, but not going to chase. So they've got the left side pushed up, and they still got 2 minutes to work with this Fire Giant buff due the Knights. They've got the mid wave pushed up as well. So we'll see what kind of split they're looking for this siege.
Cubo's in mid alongside Scary. We saw a little 3-2 split for the Pittsburgh Knights a little bit later on last year, if memory serves. This time it's going to be Cubo and Scary, the double warriors. They don't put a whole lot of pressure on kills here in this position, though, and that's my concern, is they don't have... Arthur's horrible at pushing Phoenixes, awful attack speed, can't boost it up with attack speed items. Neither of these characters really kill Phoenixes very well, so I don't think this is super threatening.
They did a lot of damage to Dardez, whatever happened there. I think it was the Intoxicate from Neilma that brought Dardez down to half HP already. And Pittsburgh Knights have the luxury of backing up, all grouping up on this hell, and then starting up their re-siege. So even though maybe they don't have a ton of kill potential, I think they do have a lot of whittle potential of slowly chipping away at SSG.
Exactly, and they're more than happy to take the war of attrition, but no blink ult for Neil does hamper their initiation should they decide to go for it. But the big deal was that they got Vote's ultimate out. That's the best defense tool.
Cheerio blinks in. Zapman is low. They switch targets off of Paul. They're just going to say, what if we don't give him anyone to heal? They take care of Neil Ma as well. So those other two who are off on the 3-2 do find that mid-Phoenix. Paul even gets the kill on the Cheerio. That's huge that he finds that turnaround play. But what about Cubo Fred? He's in a tough spot here on the right-hand side. If Space Station can find the cutoff, this is an excellent kill to grab. But Space Station somehow found a way to turn this fight around.
Cubo's bead's already on cooldown, nowhere for him to go now. With Raffer here, this is an abduct away from a guaranteed kill. Big meaty claws secure another kill for Raffer, and that evens us up at 15 each. But I love the decision making here from Space Station. Paul is itemized very well to defend against the dive. He has Breastplate of Valor, he's got Winged Blade, he's hell, he's hard to kill. What if we just kill Zap? It Zap's against a character in Raven where you have to Aegis his damage because he'll kill you if you don't. He'll kill you through the healing with that Heartseeker done. But if you don't, so you need to Aegis, but if you Aegis, you can't get healed. Paul has to time his Light Stance 1 on the second you get out of your Aegis and hope it doesn't get body blocked and hope that he doesn't juke it. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong with that strategy, and I think that Cheerio and the rest of Space Station have really found that ideal strategy to try and bring him down.
But what can't be lost in this is that mid-Phoenix did go down. The Knights, even despite technically losing the fight, I think come away with that with the advantage, as now Space Station had to deal with that mid-fire wave. It's one of the easier ones to deal with. It's not that left side Phoenix, so you can push the wave up and still contest. But Primal Fury for the Knights means they'll be able to burn this enhanced Fire Giant even easier with a little bit of extra damage they'll be doing to all the monsters on the map and taking less damage from it as well as they tank it up. So the job does get a bit harder for SSG.
But that was extra time that Space Station got to push out that mid-fire wave. Sure. Knowing that Zap is doing that Primal Fury means that Space Station can take their sweet time getting towards this Fire Giant. Primal's valuable at this point in the game. I certainly like to have it, but I wonder if just insta-pulling fire is the better call there for PK.
Cuba Fred's a bit far forward, but no CC collapse from Space Station means the Knights are A-OK. This fight around the Fire Giant has so much riding on it for both these squads. Raffer goes in first, the abduct onto Scary D. Cheerio blinks in and just takes a fistful of damage, but it still works. They get rid of Zapman early on. The Scarab's Blessing means he can stick right onto Paul, but now that it's run out, Cheerio's in no man's land, but they blow up Cubo Fred on his dive. Yes, they lose Cheerio, but he sets up for a 2-for-1. Plus, look at the wreck that is the Knights team that's left behind after the fight. They pull Neil Ma back in. It's too much damage from the wood chipper. That is Boat. SSG with the target swap over to Zapman have now won 2 fights in a row.
I think the big reason that PK doesn't just insta-pull fire is exactly what happened. Zap didn't have Aegis. He doesn't want to get one shot, but then they stand around and wait for it to happen anyways. They don't just reset and wait long enough for Zap to get his Aegis back up. Cheerio's just playing so well right now, just doing his job perfectly, taking Zap out in these dives without fail every single time. And Cubo on the Nike just isn't able to match that same quick damage output. He needs help from Scary. He's there to do relevant damage, sure, but also to get some assistance in the meantime. He can't 100-0 quite like the Robin can.
It's all on Cheerio for me, man. So much of these late-game Smite fights is about determining the relative value of each team's sort of backline dive, right? And which team can pull more help back to that dive first or can deal with it correctly and then return to help with the dive on the other side. And Cheerio just pulls too much attention. The Knights, as you said with Cubo, cannot hope to match it on their side. They have got to bring help for Zapman or Paul or whoever it is they dive, especially now that it's Zapman. Cheerio's time to kill is quick, man. Zapman will blow up if he does not get a little bit of assistance in that fight. And so far, Cheerio's just been the one keeping Space Station in it almost single-handedly.
And this Knight's composition is pretty peel light. I mean, Bacchus doesn't have great peel. Right. It's horrible peel against Robin, where your Belch never gets off in time, and if it does, then he just overhead kicks it. If you try and flop him, he overhead kicks that instead, and then your carry's dead anyways. It feels like it. I think that among traditional sports, basketball is always the closest to a MOBA, 5-on-5, similar position style a lot of the time. And Cheerio is just winning his double team every time. And that makes it impossible to play defense against, because it's either Cheerio wins his double team and scores, or he passes the ball off, gets out, forces Zap out of the fight, and then the rest of the team is wide open for the three. I mean, there's no defense when someone is being this dominant in every team fight. And until PK figure out a way to actually win their 2-on-1s or their 3-on-1s against Cheerio, they aren't winning another team fight the rest of the game.
Yeah, and to be honest, they had figured out a way earlier. It was have Paul load up on the Wing Blade and the Breastplate of Valor, right? And make sure that no matter what, Paul's able to buy time. And so Cheerio just kind of was like, wait, why do we have to kill Paul again? Can't we just kill Zap? And it's absolutely working, taking this Jingwei out of the fight here these last few times. But now we get to see SSG with their first Phoenix Siege of the game. And how do you like their chances up against the Knights?
I think that Dardez's poke has been really, really relevant so far in putting pressure on these frontliners. The CC chain from Raffer is really good. I think that they've got a pretty good siege. I don't know about this 3-1-1. I like the idea of splitting up this hell from the rest of her team, but I don't know that Nikah really wins his 1v1 hard enough to put pressure on this right side Phoenix.
Well, they're trusting the winning this 3v3, it seems like, over in left. This left side Phoenix is already low. I remember the mid Phoenix is the one that the Knights got earlier on. So if Space Station do get this most valuable Phoenix over here in left, the Knights don't really have anything that counteracts that extra pressure they're going to have to deal with from these fire minions. But that's huge from Cubo. Fred, he's winning the 1v1 up against Cheerio, forcing the blink out from him defensively, and Cubo still has his. In fact, Cubo Fred will be able to rejoin this fight a lot sooner. Blink sends Sentinel Azus. Boat gets the kill onto Neil Ma, and Cubo Fred has 2 members slowed in the back, but he hasn't actually got any damage on any of the relevant members. And where is Scary D in all of this? He's just over on the right, not doing much. Now he's TPing in to try and join up here with this match. They need the help badly. Space Station are starting to find ways to turn this fight around. Big knockup comes through. Scary D has taken 1 member up to the air, but as soon as he lands, the damage is there. Space Station still hold on to all their members.
Man, really, really split up fight. And Space Station's just been doing so well in the grouped 5-on-5s. I'm surprised that they don't just do that again on the Phoenix. They try and spread out, and Cubo wins his 1v1 against Cheerio really, really easily. Cherry must have taken Phoenix shots in order to make it that one-sided, because Cubo hadn't even used the ultimate to put him that low, and that just shouldn't happen. Scary takes forever to teleport over. Nikah gets his TP off. I think that the wards that Scary was trying to TP to either expired or got killed, and that's why it took him forever to join that fight. And Scary should still find himself lucky, count himself lucky rather, because Nikah actually missed his Lord of the Afterlife off of the Khepri abduct, and that would have been enough to kill the King Arthur. Just a little bit inaccurate there for Nikah in a pretty rare, rough game, because he's been on a real hot streak so far. Really, all of Season 7. I think he's had an okay game, but getting caught in mid and that dropped kill on the left-hand side certainly hurts SSG.
They still do have a small advantage in that the Aegis is down for Zapman. I know Dardez is down 2, but I think the team with the better dive is unquestionably the team with Cheerio at this point. So if there is a backliner that's vulnerable, I think Space Station capitalize perhaps a bit better. But this next Fire Giant fight is so much of this match here at this point. Space Station won that last fight and got their siege, but they really couldn't open up much with it. So that has reset the state of the game quite a bit here into this next fight.
Neil just waiting on that horrific emblem to come back up. He's been able to find really good ones in the back line. That really delays the surge forward to help Cheerio. Problem has been that Cheerio's just been winning those fights anyways without any sort of help from his back line, and that's going to have to change. But now the full build is there for Zapman. No defense. Thought he might go a defense item instead of those boots. Decides to just keep on going to the damage department, trying to just out-trade Cherry.
Wow, it's Space Station that started up the Fire Giant. They have to drop it, though. Kivo's taking a good deal of poke, and look at Cheerio. He's trying to find his way towards Zapman already, especially with Neil Ma in trouble on the right side. Cheerio knows it's free real estate to look for Zapman in the back. He gets attention from Cubo Fred as well. This is what we mean by that 2v1 that he forces on the left-hand side. So Space Station are free to poke out Neil in right, and with the Knights kind of left in tatters after that fight, Space Station head right back towards the FG. They don't have Cheerio's ult or Dardez, but they're still going to start up the Fire Giant. The Knights are on their way in, and that should be enough to reset the aggro. Neil Maul gets in aggressively, but gets abducted right away by Rapper. That's enough to stall out this fight, but Scary D is diving for both, forcing the Sunbreaker out, and the damage continues. Neil Maul flops on the back line to Dardez, but Rapper is in trouble. Zapman is the one that collects. Cheerio in trouble in the back as well, and Cubo Fred gets that critical kill. The Knights now in the best position they've been in 20 minutes.
Nikah in an awful spot. He's going to get killed here. 3 for nothing. And who cares about the health bars here for PK, because they're all going to be full awfully soon, courtesy of Paul's Hell.
And this could very well be the game. Dardez and Boat have way too tall of tasks to try and accomplish with only one ultimate between the two of them. Mid-Phoenix goes down. This is the one they already grabbed earlier, and Dardez and Boat can't even make it into the fight. Scary D has Dardez in trouble. In fact, it's Boat that falls first. The Dia side is not far away here once Dardez collapses. That's the Knights forcing us all the way to a game 3.
Man, was that tough, though, because it's just a really good play by Cheerio and Dardez. Dardez did nearly 40k player damage this game, and his scoreline doesn't really reflect how impactful he was. But it was really pretty binary team fights for me, Finch. Did Cheerio one-shot Zap? If yes, good fight for SSG. If no, bad fight for SSG. And there really didn't seem to be an in-between.
And I still feel as though the Space Station weren't quite doing enough with that space that was bought for them by Cheerio. I know Cheerio didn't get that kill on his Zapman that last fight, but he forced Cubo Fred to basically solo ult him in that last fight. Drew 2 people's worth of attention over to him. I got to feel like the rest of the boys in that 4v3 got to be able to capitalize a bit more.
I agree. I think it's really a testament, though, to how effective that front line for PK was, that they were able to withstand all that damage. Neil was consistently finding big, horrific emblems, and that makes a world of difference in someone like a Scary D surviving in the midst of Vote and Dardez, who are both putting out pretty good damage to him in that back line.
Great work from the Knights, though. You mentioned how hot these two teams are right now, and we're seeing the evidence of it as they make our way to a game number 3.
We figured this one would be close, but I don't know if we figured it would be this close. Game 2, Gormizer, very similar in some capacities to game number 1, where it looks like there's no way the Knights are going to lose after that FG early in the game, and then it turns around, and it looks like there's no way that SSG are going to lose. And at the end of the day, Gore, it's one final fight around the end, and the Knights are able to take the game.
Yeah, watching through so much of that, there are a lot of moments, honestly, in the first 30 minutes that, yes, the teams are switching who has the lead in fights, but most of the important themes from, like, maybe the first 30 minutes of that game really come down to, hey, Raffer's the target. Get his ult, and then it opens up the conversation to find the kills thereafter. And then you start seeing it at 31 minutes. From that moment forward, it's just team fights. Who's going to be able to win it? And that just shifts the dynamic so heavily. Knights get a lot of control. You get a couple of 3-for-1 trades that SSG win, and they're very happy to be able to just run it down after that. And like you said, it comes down to, I would say, 2 essential fights at the end there for the Knights, or else they're looking at a 2-0.
And you kind of got the vibe, and Aggro highlighted it pretty well. As, you know, Cheerio is doing his best to just get in on the back line there. Zapman just scaled up so well by the end of that game. I mean, he's not the end-all, be-all in that final fight, but poured out plenty of damage to help out. Now we've gotten another look, though. This is a good, I think, replay, at least a guy to kind of springboard a conversation off of. Cubo Fred on this Nike in the jungle. Now we've started to see it trickle out into other parts of the league. How important of a role do you think Cubo had here in game number 2?
I think Cuvo, actually maybe one of the most essential kills for the game. I think there were so many moments where his disruption was really good, especially being able to isolate people on the side of SSG. I mean, I can't count the amount of times that I was able to, well, it was 2 or 3 realistically, but like Nikah getting isolated by the Knights, and a lot of that, I think, started on the back of Cuvo Fred, but even at the very end there, he got into the backline for Cherio. He got rid of the jungler while the rest of the team was looking for Raffer, looking for Dardes or Vote, or having to deal with Nikah himself. And so his consistency there from Cuvo, I think, was essential for this win.
Man, Paula's pretty good at this game, huh? Especially if you don't know why Hell is being banned out, especially after, you know, it wasn't a you know, out of this world, ban it from him every single time type of performance, but that obviously shows where some of the logic is in taking that Hell away. Now on both sides, we've seen Aphrodite for Dardes, we've seen Hell for Paul in Game 2. I wonder if in Game 3, we see one, both, or maybe neither, and then that's a conversation we had after Game 1, and I may be having here after Game 2.
Someone pulls out Chang'e, and everyone goes insane because they're like, I'm sorry, what? We forgot she even existed. And that's actually something that I feel like I could almost hear maybe Aggro and Mifflin shut this down immediately, because this is not a vein of thought that I think deserves a lot of merit. But Chang'e has a lot of anti-heal in her kit. She deals with healers pretty well.
Hey.
You know, she's maybe not super popular, and I think there's a lot of people who will shy away from her. I think maybe you could convince me she might be worthwhile against a Hell.
Yeah, there's conversations to be had around that. We'll have to see if Chang'e maybe comes around here and picks and bans for game number 3, a 32-minute game 1, a 45-minute game 2. Remember, 80-20 was the community split on this one, over to SSG and 20 over to the Knights. And this one, I think, had game 3 written all over it. And here we are. Hell first banned out here from SSG. So that is one of the 2 pieces of the puzzle we wondered that would trickle over here into Game 3. Do the Knights prioritize the Aphrodite at this point? It has been Hera first ban overall. Still, obviously, a couple more bans there if they want to take the Aphrodite away. But I think you're playing with fire if you're the Knights. You don't have yourself the Hell, and giving over Afro without a distinct counter out on the other side might be tricky.
Yeah. I think the bans, I mean, realistically, getting rid of things like Camazotz and then getting rid of the Aphrodite seem like the next couple of steps to me here for the Knights. I mean, maybe you can leave Camazotz for a little bit later, see if SSG ban it out so you can flex that into something different. But if you're going to take away, especially those 2 picks at the very beginning, Merlin's already taken out, Raijin is in the conversation as well. SSG are going to get something that is a top pick. It's just, what are you going to give them? And since they ban out the Camazotz, you have a little bit of leniency. I mean, Jormungandr was pretty big early, Kali was pretty big early, but neither being banned right now, you have to open up, where do you go?
Well, Kali does end up getting banned out. I don't want to detract from picks and bans, but for a while there I was juggling with whether or not Bellini had changed colors. Is there a new friend walking around the Gormizer apartment now?
Hey, Lala. Lala,
oh, it's Lala.
It's Lala.
I
Bellini,
noticed.
I think,
like,
is on
Bellini's
my
not
other shoulder.
black and white. There's no way.
Bellini's hanging out down here.
Oh, what's up, Bellini? All right, so there's a new friend in the
There's
apartment
a new friend wandering
over the
right
weekend. But it's Kali taken off the board. Ullr now picked up though. Ullr largely banned out here throughout this set so far. What do you like in an Ullr picked up first overall for SSG?
I would, man. First off, probably flexibility. Could go mid. Could go into the duo lane. We've seen him a lot more in the duo lane this season than we've seen him in mid. There's always that little bit of flexibility he brings. But there's also a lot of control. He's a guy who can stun you, damage you from outside of your damaging range, and jump away from the fight. Keep himself safe, self-peel or peel for you, have a lot of lockdown in a 1v1. Like he just does what you want out of a hunter, especially since we see a lot of the fights oriented around a 3v3 in mid. He's going to be left on his own. He's got to be able to float.
Well, Achilles a strong pick as well. First 2 for the Knights here, King Arthur and Khepri. Arthur, you know, we've had this conversation around the Hell and the Aphrodite for great reason. They've been big difference makers. And we've kind of touched on the King Arthur here and the difference that it's made, especially in that solo lane. But I think really in both iterations, whether it's Nikah in Game 1 or Scary D in Game 2, I think the Arthur has proven, at least between these 2 teams, to be such an important pick. And I think the Knights are good off for getting him.
I mean, being able to pick up something like the Khepri is strong. But again, I mean, this goes back to what I was talking about last game, which was my instant thought process when I see a Khepri is grab, executes. And you know what Achilles brings? Well, 3 of them if he hits at least the first one. You know, being able to continue that train. And it goes through Khepri revives. It makes it so that not only does Khepri maybe get to ignore kind of what was happening to Raffer last game where he was getting focused out to force that ult early, but now you just straight up ignore it sometimes. Hey, you want to save this Hebo? Good luck. We're just going to kill him down. This Achilles, it could flex over to deal with the King Arthur, which is what we saw them do earlier on, or at least the Knights tried to do when they were in the position of SSG. But realistically, I think you could throw it into the jungle here and still have it float pretty well, and maybe even better because he'll be around that Khepri more to counter that ult.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to watch that dynamic throughout this game. Paul and Hell is one conversation. Paul and Hebo, maybe to him, would jump out as much more obvious. A very strong pick for the Knights in the mid lane. How does a Hebo versus a Discordia matchup kind of look to you?
Well, Discordia, I think team play, and honestly, this is going to be the truth, I think, against Hebo no matter what. Team play, Discordia is going to be able to open up a lot. She's got the CC, nice long-range team fight ultimate. Hebo just kills you dead really good, and that's kind of just like one-on-one, 101 for him. What is he going to be able to bring to the table? It is a 1v1 against a Discordia where she just can't survive him. I think the damage output that Paul is going to have this time around is just going to be immense. And we know he makes it work well. When the fights transition into late-game jungle, hey, one crushing wave is all it takes. You can hit 2 or 3 people there, and all of a sudden, you're winning that team fight.
And Paul does hit 2 or 3 people a good bit of the time with those crushing waves. Hachiman for the 4th pick here for the Knights. A little jungle, little solo priority for the Knights with their final 2 bans. Yamoja, it's almost kind of a forethought, a foregone conclusion here. So used to seeing her banned out. Surprising to me that she's left open up to this point. Obviously, some changes around her numbers with the Oni and some damage. But 4th overall for SSG. What do you make of the Yamoja being locked in?
She is really good, but also not really good at the same time. It just depends on what flow you get in with her. Of course, it makes sense. Rivers kind of go alongside her. But, again, you're looking to try and control the jungle. I mentioned One Water God with Hebo's ult, but Rivers Rebuke does it even better. Hey, we're just going to make new walls this time around. We'll lock you down for the Achilles or for the Arlong Shen and the Discordia. Like, there's a lot of lockdown for SSG and not a lot of getaway for the Knights.
So, with that being said, we're moving into a game 3 here, Gormizer. Does that mean your hat is in the SSG ring?
I'm throwing it over there. I think a good Rivers Rebuke locks down Hebo, locks down Hachiman, and locks down Vamana. I think the Knights are going to struggle in the late game fights.
There's plenty of potential there for the Knights, but can they capitalize? We'll have to go down to game 3 to find out.
Thanks, Dolson and Gormizer. It'll be Finch and Aggro closing it out as we move into Game 3 between Space Station and the Knights. And you heard them talk about this Yamoja quite a bit there, Aggro. A new parallel universe where Yamoja gets picked all the way down around 8th or 9th in the draft. Not nearly as valued as she once was. But can she be that big deciding factor that she once was?
I think so. I think that I completely agree with what Gore and Dave were saying on the desk, that this pick, for me, will probably determine the outcome of this game because Raffer has been pretty hot and cold so far this year. Yamoja's not an easy-to-execute god. You're going to have to be accurate and really put yourself in good positions to win. Maybe not blinking into purple buff necessarily, but maybe that is the play.
He does get aggressive, and he is able to find the 2-man stun, and he is able to take the buff away. Not bad from Raffer, despite the early blink in. Wow, I suppose he just needed to find that positioning and get there. Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen in any way, because that is pretty nuts. But either way, an impressive start, but this Yamoja is going to be critical. I think that the way these two supports play, the Yamoja there for Raffer and the Khepri there for Neil, how well can Neil use those Scarab's Blessings around Nikah's Execute? Because that is a lot of tension on the other side, that as long as that Fatal Strike is up and Nikah's nearby, Scarab's Blessing's not going to get you a whole lot of value.
Yeah, I think that Raffer is going to be really critical in this game, but I also think that watching Nikah as we move back into the action is also going to be really critical, and how well he's able to find those executes and mitigate some of that Scarab's Blessing value from Neil Ma, because Khepri's good, man. Abduct is a really strong tool. He has the ranged root, but his value is so much lower when you're constantly able to punish those Scarab's Blessings, or if he feels like he can't use one in a fight because he knows they'll just get executed.
I think that the big way to play around that is not to think of your ultimate as the res anymore, and just think of it as the speed buff, because it does give that target the movement speed. I think that once you get into the 5-on-5s, if Nikah has that ultimate, I think you kind of just got to throw that Scarab's Blessing around anywhere you think it can help. You throw it onto Scary, throw it onto Paul, throw it onto Cuvo, just to give him even more movement speed so that he can maybe catch up to Vote or something like that. I mean, I think that you just have to accept that your primary reason for your ultimate is just not going to work anymore, and that stinks, but that's reality. So let's not just hope that Nikah makes a mistake and instead get some value out of it.
Right, I mean, think about the two worlds, right? If you wait for Nikah to use that ultimate elsewhere, then very likely he's already gotten the value out of it anyway, and you're not even sort of mitigating it. You're in a bad game state anyway, and if you try and use it early, it just gets punished. So perhaps using it as just that amplification, you know, perhaps for Cubo Fred, right, or for something like that, or for Scary D to get to that backline, then that might be the best bit of value that Neil Ma can find. But that's why we're going to be watching him closely alongside Raffer. The way that these two supports play will certainly be critical in this game. And we'll finally be getting to see our two mid-lane mages this time, Aggro, on some regular mid-lane mages. The Discordia for Dardes, but Paul is on his signature Heba.
And I love to see no healers, personally. That's definitely what I prefer to see. But Vote's going to be in some trouble here. Good dash in from Zap, gets the beads, but here comes Cherio.
If they overcommit, it could be trouble. I don't think Cherio got the knockup, but I also don't think that it's going to matter. Spacestation able to get first blood off that early rotation from Cherio and off the purple buff pressure. I like the idea from the Knights to try and be there to defend it, but they were not ready for that extra member in Cherio being there.
You could tell that Neil really wanted to punish Vote for not having beads anymore and using his jump, but just ends up getting on the hook a little bit too long.
Whew, that's good damage on the Zap, man. Not going to be enough for the kill, but they get the beads out of him and do a lot of the heavy lifting already. Vote's level 4 on the back of 2 purple buff invades and finding the first blood here this game. Zapman still level 2 and now being zoned a bit off some farm. This is a rough start, and this is what you pick Uller for, Aggro. I think we've been seeing too much picking Uller and just chilling in the long lane. I feel like you've got to get aggressive if you're going to pick this guy.
Agreed, and having your support get purple buff over a hog at level 1 is
that
a
helps.
really good way to start, for sure. I think that really does set the tone in this lane. That's the reason that Zap's so far behind. He's the bottom of the XP per minute charts, even below Neil at times. Those two are pretty far behind. Look at where Vote is, because not only does Raffer steal away PK's purple, but he lets Vote solo his, and that is a big difference in farm at level 1.
Right, Raffer gets to sort of sacrifice farm and not only put Vote further ahead, but he stays ahead of Neil Ma because Neil Ma was the recipient of that first blood earlier, the one that fell and gave up the first blood at the beginning of the game. So this is really a great spot for Space Station to be in early. A bit remnant of game number 1 where they manufactured a lead where perhaps you wouldn't have thought they had one. Now we just got to hope that they don't overstep and give it away. But Zapman's not on the Chernobog this time, which can punish positioning mistakes, so perhaps they can keep up the pressure. They don't let the Knights grab this purple buff, and they will be stripping it away yet again.
I mean, defensive wards there from PK, but all it does is let them know that they have to leave, because if they don't, they're going to end up losing another life with Zap not having beads and Blink ready to go for Cherio, who's rushed the boots on the Erlong Shen jungle. A little bit of a different look. Normally, you only see something like this on Mercury, who really values that extra movement speed since he gets power from it. But Cherry leveraging his base damage early on, not needing that extra power, I suppose.
This has got to be the answer, though, from the Knights, right? They can't defend purple, so they rotate to invade blue. The problem is Space Station were ready. They had Raffer and Dardes in position to defend, especially because Vote has a stranglehold on this long lane now. It might be a straight-up misplay for Raffer to sit in lane with Vote at this point, and because they kind of pull them away from that now guaranteed lane, they're able to deal with that response to try and come gank blue buff. This has been great from Space Station.
Exactly. Raffer doesn't add to the kill potential in duo at all. Vote has kill potential by existing on that side of the map right now. may as well let him get that solo farm continually, still put pressure on soloing Zap, and actually be able to help elsewhere on the map.
And they've got an Achilles in solo, which has a little bit of pressure right now over the King Arthur, has already finished his Warrior's Blessing. And it looks like Scary D has fallen off his back timing. Still 90 seconds from the teleport, but he's low on mana and HP and can't comfortably go pick up that blue buff. So Nikah's got pressure on the right-hand side as well as Vote having pressure on the left-hand side. Right now, Space Station in a great spot to go basically wherever they want to on the map. And remember, Space Station also have that Discordia passive, so whoever's leading in player damage right now has even more of an advantage in their matchup.
Exactly, and that's where this Discordia gets even more value, because she's still really strong at all points in the game. She still has great damage and CC output, but she's also contributing just by being here. And Dardes is ever so slightly behind in the mid lane. I'd imagine he's going to hit 8 off this minion wave, which he does, so basically the exact same amount of farm so far to Paul, and the other side lanes are winning, and it's because he's contributing. So it feels good, you know, you can let your boys know that they're welcome for all the help you give.
Jerry, I think, was able to secure that Alpha Harpy on the backside. I like what we're seeing from Cuvo, that he was pressuring those Harpies just now right there near the Jungle Shrine. He's been trying to look for these blue buff invades. He knows that Cheerio was showing presence in left to try and get one more punishing kill onto Zapman that would probably put to seal the coffin on that long lane for them if they can get one more kill over there. And so Cuvo Fred's trying to push some pressure on right, but you saw Dardes trying to mitigate it the best he could, looking for some damage over the wall to slow down that invade attempt. Space Station really are playing the map as 5 very well right now, and that's what they do, I think, when they're playing at their best, when they're playing like we saw them in Season 6, this current squad. When they force you to kind of look around the map in all these directions, there is no good answer.
And now they take one fight in mid and they can blow the game wide open, basically. But Cherry has really not spent a whole lot of time around mid, which is certainly different than what we normally see from SSG drafts. He's really been leaning on this left side to really keep Zap down, which has worked pretty effectively. Look at the difference in power level between Zap in his build and Vote in his build. Vote has an item in Transcendence that cares less about being stacked, though it does care, needing those full stacks to get the CDR, and full boots compared to Zapman, who's getting there on the Devo Glove stacks, but not done yet, and has no boots at all quite yet, and it lets Vote do that, which is basically put Zap in a coffin anytime he's accurate and forces him back to base at the perfect time because purple's coming up.
Well, it's a dive in the middle lane onto Dardes. He'll go into the Colossal Fury for it. Dardes does end up trading his ultimate out for it, but that is not bad at all. He holds on to the beads by using his ult for the CC immunity, so he comes out on top in the trade, and now Neomar is in trouble. They don't quite have the damage with Dardes forced to back, but still, that puts good poke there onto Neil and reestablishes their control.
Nice knock-up from Paul, prevented the taunt, which could have come in from Cherio. I think Neil would have gotten his res off either way, but would have made him more vulnerable, made the whole team more vulnerable, if not for that nice CC coming in from Paul. And Pittsburgh Knights have clearly been watching a little bit of Obey as of late. Cuvo's doing his best Sino impression with his God Pool this set. It's really been
Nike
the Nike into the Vamana, fighting that Warrior tab these last 2 games. So it's an odd pick, and I think the Cuvo looks really, really good on the Nike. We'll see how comfortable he looks on this Vamana, because it seems to be in a bit of a weird spot now.
Wow, a dive onto Scary D. The blink and the ultimate there from Cheerio. Remember, they had pressure in this lane earlier, but Scary D has reset that lane dynamic here on this side. He's been able to fight pretty well these last few times, so not an easy pull. Raffer fully zoning Cubo Fred out of this fight, but is that all in service of trying to get this blue buffle? The collapse onto Raffer is on. He pops like a balloon. Cubo Fred gets there first, but that's huge damage from Dardes, almost single-handedly turning this fight back around. That Discordia play was absolutely nuts. Now Cubo Fred has to run for the hills, but he's on the wrong side of the map, and if Nikah chooses to turn back around after grabbing this blue buff, then Cubo Fred is in danger of trying to find his way out, but he is stuck engaged in this fight with Scary D around the blue buff, so Cubo Fred should be able to position safely. But still, Dardes outputting plenty of damage at this point.
Nikah just a little bit short on that Fatal Strike damage, and now has to be concerned for his own life with Cuvo surging forward a bit, but Dardes still in tow, still pulling out plenty of damage in that 2v2. Neil never got his ultimate off, and he definitely could have. I don't think Nikah was super close to him at the time. I don't think he just expected the amount of burst that Dardes has in the build so far. He went Deso instead of Divine earlier on, and I'd bet pretty good money that Dardes is going to go Divine next item. But normally in a draft like this, where you see Vamana and King Arthur on the other side, a Hebo that is likely to build some sort of lifesteal, at least in the boots department, I think a lot of players would go Divine in that slot, and I think the extra damage that Deso provided caught Neil and the rest of PK a bit off guard.
I'm going to have to go get my own soapbox, I guess, to make a big argument about how good Strife is. But yeah, man, Strife's good. It's a great tool in that fight for him, and Discordia loves those clumped-up battles where she can find all her damage. But Space Station have just played better throughout this early game, and a lot of it, I think, does stem from that, I don't know, lucky's not the right word, but certainly fortuitous purple buff steal they get at the beginning of the game that basically handed them that long lane pressure, but they have used it perfectly since then.
Exactly, that really goes to show how important those early plays are. Neil reses and survives just barely. I thought that last bit of unruly magic might take him out, but Neil trades his ult 2 for 1 and ends up surviving anyways.
But a nice sequence here for Space Station allows these few moments, looking even for that pressure in middle lane and very nearly getting that kill into Neilma, at least forcing him to use the res on himself and opening up the door for them to get a bit more aggressive in the next few fights. Cherio's got to be careful. Paul and Cubo appear to be out for blood. He uses the blink to reposition. Crushing Wave hits everybody going the other direction. And the River's Rebuke does cut off any chance of a re-engage from the Knight. So Space Station have to play a little bit of defense in that sequence, but they do it nicely and get everybody out of there alive.
And look, Pittsburgh Knights, I think, have actually stemmed the bleeding pretty well, but they still left Zap out on this island on the left-hand side. My man is just now finishing his Devo Glove stacks, down about 2 levels, hasn't gotten a purple buff in how knows how long. Like, it's still tough right now for PK, despite how well they've been playing these engagements.
Zapman does get the beads out from Vote with a nice EI Jutsu stun. He heads back towards purple, but Vote, feeling himself a bit with the lead, even low on mana and HP, steps forward. He's got Cheerio here for the numbers advantage, so Zapman has to use his bees. The purple buff belongs to Space Station one more time. Cheerio has really been all in on this left side pressure aggro, and he has fallen a bit behind Cuvo, who hasn't done nearly as much ganking this game. He's been mostly farming.
Look at where he is in the net worth charts. I mean, he's really far up in comparison to the rest of his team, but still only less than 100 gold above Cherry. It's really been in the XP department that he's making a little bit more headway, but even then, it's not a full level. It's about half of one level. So I think that Cherrio's decision-making and where he's put pressure has been completely warranted so far in this game. I do wonder if Fred could put a little bit more pressure on ganking and maybe try and chase down this Uller on the left-hand side. But now that Vote has both relics, no bees right now, but Aegis up, feels a little bit harder for a character like Vamana to get that kill easily.
Yeah, I wonder where Vote is in damage taken. I feel like he has been under zero duress this game. No pressure has been put onto this Uller on the left-hand side of the map so far. As soon as I say that, suddenly there's 3 people over in left. Perhaps Vote is in a bit of trouble here this time. Has some backup, though, with Rapper Cheerio over the wall. Good taunt from Cheerio. Forces the hand of that ultimate early. Uses the ultimate to get right through the River's Rebuke and keep up the chase. Aegis buys Vote some time, and he ends up getting flattened. Zapman gets some much-needed revenge on the left-hand side of the map, and the Knights suddenly right back in it.
Just no anti-heal quite yet for SSG. I believe that's going to be a Toxic Blade there for Cheerio, but he doesn't have it yet. And so this Vamana gets to walk wherever he wants, including right on through that River's Rebuke. Remember, Colossal Fury still gets you through those player-made walls.
Gold Fury now being pulled by the Knights, and Space Station shows up to defend. That's a great apple. Catches out Neilma, and Cheerio gets the kill, so they'll pull the Gold Fury right back. That was a huge fight for the Knights to get that pick on the Vote, but this is going to completely wipe all of that out, aggro. What a big sequence here from Space Station. And I know that the anti-heal is big, but I also think it's worth noting they don't have Nikah in these fights yet. The Knights are getting full value out of the Scarab's Blessing right now.
Exactly, and as soon as Nikah starts joining, I think it's going to be pretty tough for Neil to stay effective on this Khepri. And even up until this point, Neil has kind of struggled to stay effective. He's been focused quite a bit. 0, 3, and 2 so far.
Is a bit stubborn from Paul, this positioning. He still has the ultimate to reposition and uses the Aegis to avoid getting executed. But that is Paul. He likes to walk those fine lines. He trusts his Hebo play above all else and ends up having to give up the Aegis as a result.
Love Nikah's late rotation in just to see if there were any stragglers, and there was. And trading out that ultimate on a cooldown that's not super long, got 10% CDR anyways, and he's not going to need it anytime soon if he's not rejoining a fray anyways, for an Aegis that Cherio or Dardes can easily punish in that mid lane. I think it is certainly worth Nikah's time.
Agreed. Not bad for Nikah there in that last fight. Vote finds the tier 1 tower in left up against Zapman. That eventually does fall down. Now this Uller might be a bit free to rotate around the map too, and we already talked about Nikah's rotations once he started getting involved in these fights, but I think Vote's impact going to be pretty significant as well. I know the game has stayed close in terms of that gold and experience, but that's kind of because Spacestation haven't really taken their food out of the oven yet, so to speak. Once they bring that all together into these team fights, I wonder if the Knights might be a bit further behind than it actually looks.
I agree, though. It is a lot, this lead, on one person, and that's Vote. He's up about 1,000 gold by himself over Zap, and that can be a great thing where Vote just gets all this extra farm. He's able to pop off in these fights. It can also be a negative if you start to lose him.
Zapman evades it perfectly. You think he's used to a lot of pressure over in his lane just yet? Zapman with EI Jutsu stays calm and doesn't have to give up anything except the ultimate to get out. But Paul's in trouble. Nikah's found him in the back line, but doesn't have enough damage to finish him off. The Fatal Strike finds nothing, so Neomall responds by putting the Scarab's Blessing on himself. But Cherio gets to the back line and completes the job onto Paul. Vote runs in and doesn't miss anything as he shuts down Neomall. Suddenly, it's a 2-for-0 for Space Station. And what do you know? It's the solo laner and the Hunter getting involved and turning the fight around.
And Paul never saw that extra damage coming, thought he was safe after that initial wave, but it got to the point where he couldn't use his big wave. That ultimate's still up and ready to go for Paul on the respawn timer because Cherry and Vote rotated in and popped him quickly with that extra damage.
Looks like Pyromancer is going to be the next thing up here for Space Station. The Fury's already down. We'll be back up for 2 minutes. So they go to grab the other neutral objective. Scary D is on his way to contest, so Rapper zones him out cleanly with that Riptide. It will be enough to prevent any chance of a steal, and Space Station get the Pyro. This is just what I was worried about for the Knights in terms of trying to stay close in this game. Once that big team fight happened in mid, they didn't quite have all the answers.
And Pittsburgh Knights have a team composition that scales okay into the late game. I mean, Vamana Jungle loses its insane dive potential that it's impossible to kill him in the early game. With all this anti-heal online now, you can definitely kill Fred, but still has that great mobility, still pretty hard to lock down. Hebo's going to continue to just scale up and do Paul level damage, which is absolutely crazy, but Space Station has such great CC in their composition that I think it's going to be pretty hard for Scary and Neil to be effective in these fights because of the amount of crowd control that Pittsburgh Knights have. No beads for either one. They both elect to go away from the defensive relic. Phantom there for Neil, worried about that River's Rebuke, and for good reason. But the healing coming through from SSG with Raffer, he stayed pretty safe so far this game. I feel like with the amount of CC and Yamoja presence in the late game, I think Space Station's pretty well favored in this one.
Yeah, I think that the Knights could have easily made an argument for a Cursed Honk as well as Space Station here in this game, but electing not to go with it here this time, as you already highlighted. It's that Phantom they've gone with too, and they got to be ready for this next fight. We're only 25 seconds away from this next Fury spawning, and Space Station are already doing their homework to set up for it. Dardes could be in trouble. Suddenly, he's in the front lines of this fight. Erratic behavior allows him to reposition. Cubo Fred getting aggressive with that knock-up does push Vote back out. And what looked like Space Station doing homework has suddenly turned into a good fight for the Knights. Low on mana are a lot of Space Station Omi for Raffer, and maybe low on options too, so the Knights can start to step forward.
I mean, River's Rebuke down, it is a nice win, but I don't know if that's really enough. No blink now for Cuvo. Everyone still has relics for Space Station. I feel like if I'm Space Station, I'm pretty comfortable trying to pull this.
Looks like they are. Dardes is starting it up. I don't know if I Love that. He trades it back over towards Tyrio, so no harm, no foul. The Knights are now pushing their way in, but it's already too late. Primal Fury grabbed by Space Station, but the Knights want to at least make them pay. Good damage on the Cubo Fred on his way in. Means that now Tyrio can look for the Nine Turns Blessing. It forces Cubo Fred to go into that ulti, but he's in execute threshold and has to leave. And Nikah uses the Fatal Strike perfectly to collapse onto Scary D, and he's made his way into the back line, has another charge of that Fatal Strike if he wants to use it, and he will close the gap onto Paul. There's the Scarab's Blessing for some extra movement, and Paul believes in his turnaround potential, but has to use the Crushing Wave defensively in order to escape. Space Station win the fight cleanly.
And Vote still hunting Neil. Pin on the marks. Abduct is still up, and Neil around the wall, so no axe coming. But you see the team fight potential here for Space Station. Cherio finds another really good engagement. Dardez accurate with the apple, of course he is. In a small little choke point, Neil can't get away from everybody and make sure that no one gets hit by that secondary explosion. It's Scary who's on the receiving end, unfortunately for him, as he gets isolated, and Nikah's right on time with that Fatal Strike. The ways where Space Station win fights just feel like there's a lot of them, and it's really easy execution level, right? They have this CC, and it's, oh, if we just land a taunt from Erlong onto one member, and then CC chain them off that, we win the fight. If Dardez finds a good ult, we win a fight. If we just onk Cuvo, we win the fight. There's just so many ways that they win fights, and it feels like Pittsburgh Knights options are a lot more limited in what this composition can really do. Their dive is pretty good, but the big linchpin on keeping the back line alive while your front line is diving is this Khepri ultimate. And that doesn't matter when Nikah's around, and that's really problematic.
And I know that Paul is leading his team in player damage, but I feel like a lot of that damage has been against the guy that's pushing him out of the fight. You know what I mean? Like, it has not been onto the priority targets for the Knights here this game. He's just gotten to kind of stack it up on Nikah or Cherio as they force him to exit. They got to find a way to get Paul a bit more involved in these skirmishes, because for the most part, he's been zoned out of them.
It's been impossible for him to get involved, and that's because normally you get the Scarab's Blessing, he's allowed to dive, he doesn't have to worry about dying, but now he does have to worry about dying because of that Achilles ult on the other side, and the fact that everyone is just really far ahead of him in comparison to where Paul would normally like to be, which is ahead on a god like Hebo that can really snowball games effectively. As it stands, you kind of got to wait around with your hands in your pockets until late game and hope that Paul can do a Paul thing and find a huge ultimate and find some key knockups come late game, but that feels like it's really Pittsburgh Knights' best win condition from here.
I feel like this can't be a real defense on the right side from the Knights here. Not down 7,000 gold against a Fire Giant team, but they're showing presence while Cubo Fred gets some much-needed farm on the map. Taking away red buff at this point in the game is certainly a big deal, but they will lose that Tier 2 tower after all. It goes the way of Space Station. And Aggro, I think this is when Space Station look like potentially the best team in the league, right? When they're playing games this cleanly, like they did in Game 1, they did in Game 3. I know they had that mix-up around the purple buff in Game 1, but for the most part, this is that ability to stretch the map, that team play that I think largely is untouchable.
Agreed. I think that when you give Dardez and Cherio leads like this, and Nikah is finding himself in the right spots, it feels like that you can't really lose. And when Space Station gets dual lane pressure and doesn't make mistakes over there, it feels like it's really hard to beat them. For the most part this year, they've made a lot of mistakes over there at that duo lane. And it's why they really didn't look red hot to start off the year. And it's not that the duo lane was all of their problems. Certainly they had problems all across the map, but it felt like duo lane was the genesis of more than most. Vote gets early pressure because of a great play from Raffer. Vote holds that lead really well, accurate with his poke, keeping Zap out of lane consistently. And from there, it's just textbook. It's methodical. There's no crazy thing that they do. They just leverage their lead. They use their great team fighting compositions as they like to draft. And Pittsburgh Knights' draft just doesn't really match up to that same team fighting prowess. And I think that Space Station's finally picking compositions that put them in a position to do what they do best.
Half HP already lost from Cubo Fred. It's even worse. He dies in the Colossal Fury as Space Station saw him trying to push up that right side wave the whole way. So Fred gets sent back to base, but it's not the worst timing in the world for that death, right? It's still a minute before the Fire Giant respawns. There's not a ton Space Station can do with this 5v4 advantage, so I feel like if Cherio's going to die without using relics, there were worse times for that to happen.
Yes, I'll agree with that. It could have been worse. You're probably not contesting this Primal Fury anyways. You would like to be able to sit around the map and farm a little bit more during that time, but as far as getting picked goes, it certainly is less consequential than most picks that you'll find.
Yes, dying that freely, usually you're going to lose something on the back of it, but this time I don't think that's going to be the real big backbreaker. And would you believe there's only 10 deaths in this game? I'm really only just kind of putting it all together. This has felt like an active game from both of these teams here so far, but they've been playing relatively cleanly to not lose more off the back of some of these engagements. Space Station, though, are completely in position and set for this Fire Giant, and it looks like the Knights not going to defend this one at all. I don't know how much of that is because they lost Fred and maybe they couldn't get here sooner, but they're going to fully fall back on the Phoenixes for this one.
Fred could have been up and healthy and doing push-ups the entire time that they were setting up for that Fire Giant. I don't think Pittsburgh Knights are ever walking in to contest it, no matter Fred's state. They're just so far behind. Sure. You have to defend on Phoenix from this position. And the bad news is their Phoenix defense isn't stellar. You're not looking at something as a great way to turn these fights. Hebo can be difficult to play in these siege defenses because he just doesn't have good wave clear. You're really relying on Zap, who also doesn't have great wave clear. Cuvo is going to have to split off and defend the 1v1 in mid, but I imagine that's a fight that Cherio wins pretty well with this build. Chin size and that Executioner alongside some extra hybrid items makes him pretty difficult to beat.
Vote and Dardes still doing plenty of poke damage from the back line here in this game. Right side Phoenix is already low. River's Rebuke comes out to lock down Nail, but they can't get the kill off it. He survives. But Nikah so far getting the better of his trade with Scary D in mid. It's a 4-1 split so far, and Space Station have already whittled this right side Phoenix down. That's theirs. The Knights can't hope to defend it, and the clean play continues for Space Station Gaming here so far in this game. The Knights, if they are going to defend, I feel like it's going to require a couple of missteps from Space Station.
Agreed. This door is closing quickly, and it's just Space Station's composition does basically everything that PK wants to do better. They have better long-range CC. They have better poke. They've got better sustain. The only thing the Pittsburgh Knights has over SSG is maybe burst damage from Paul, but is he really going to be able to burst you with 4.5 items at 30 minutes? Probably not, as much as he would really like to. So there's really not a whole lot of advantages that PK have right now.
And he hasn't been able to get on priority targets all game. Nikah pushes the right wave up. It's not a big wave, but he gets some Titan damage, and he's going to force somebody to come back and deal with him. Mid-Phoenix takes half damage, and Paul has to leave, so Nikah waits for him like a bully after class and pushes him all the way back to the fountain. They lock down Scary D underneath the Phoenix as well. No execute comes out from Nikah, but they get the Mid-Phoenix that they came here for. Further clean play from Space Station with this tremendous lead they've amassed at this point. The Knights have not been able to slow him down.
This is the riskiest Phoenix, though, because Wave isn't going to be here for a while. No ultimates at all in tow here for SSG. They've got such a lead that they might be able to just brute force their way in and take this anyways. I think this is the riskiest play that Space Station has made so far in this game.
Another minute on this Fire Giant. No relics for Paul at all, so I doubt he even wants to be in this fight despite all their advantages. Strife misses, but Unruly Magic hits for 652. Dardes takes half his HP as well, but Nikah doesn't look like he's been in a fight for the last 2 minutes. He's full HP, full mana, and ready to tussle. At this point, they drop the ultimate onto Scary D. That cripples him. They get the left side Phoenix, and they get the pick. Cherio can't find any knockups there, but they pull a couple members back out of the fountain. I don't even know if Space Station want to reset. They've got minions coming in for every direction. They're just going to move on to the Titan, and the Knights have to find some kind of way to defend. Rapper and Nikah are low, but the Titan takes too much damage. It's Space Station in 30 minutes that take care of this set. It ends up being really a strong win for Space Station here to close that game out. Their aggro there. now on top here over the Knights, and a bit surprised, I would say, that they're able to find this win that cleanly. But as you said, everyone has been playing hot here, both of these teams up until this point here, so it's Space Station whose win streak will continue. But that's going to do it for the actual game. I'm going to get back over to Dulce and the boys on the desk to break it down.
Well, in a relatively lengthy set, I mean, this is probably the game with the least amount of fireworks, but that's probably in large part due to it being the cleanest game we saw out of SSG, and maybe the cleanest game entirely this set here in game number 3. Gormizer, is that a mindset you maybe subscribe to? Is this far and away the best game SSG had in this set?
Much like Aggro's cam there as they came back to us, it felt like the Knights were frozen out, but from minute 1 of that game. I mean, just early game lead that SSG kind of stumbled themselves into, and then the control. I mean, Nikah doesn't die. Cherio doesn't die. Dardes, hey, guess what? Doesn't die. You have 3 members that are dominating in terms of damage and control that aren't having any retaliation thrown back at them. Then, I mean, there were, 2 or 3 moments where you throw it over to the duo lane, you see Vote 9/10 health Zapman, and then you go, okay, cool, I know what's going on over there, and you can bounce back to the rest of the map. They had it going for them.
And with this win, we'll get into standings and stuff in a minute, but tied for first now, pending the rival result later today, are SSG. And I mean, talk about cleanliness. I mean, there are 9 total kills for SSG, and they die twice. I mean, you look at the top to bottom clean performance here from them. Cubo Fred gets 1 kill, Zapman gets 1 kill. This is like your wheelhouse if you're SSG. You get a small lead in the early game, you kind of push it into that late, don't make many mistakes along the way. Dardes is going to pour out damage, 21,000 for him. I think Nikah looked great on that Achilles. I love what SSG brought to the table here, Gore.
Yeah, I think every single part of their draft played incredibly well. I think there was a lot of execution on the Knights, and I'm going to be honest with you, Dave. We have seen this Vamana in the jungle be successful, but more not successful than he's been able to win these games. So while I think there maybe is some merit, and we've seen some of these warriors make that transition, I'm not sure I'm quite sold on it. A lot of these last couple of days haven't necessarily been the best games. There were even moments where Cubo would pop that ult and then get melted. And whether you want to throw him under the bus for it, or if you want to just throw it and chalk it up to the fact that SSG were prepared for him every time, in a lot of these cases, 3v1 scenario for them, I think it's just one of those things that the draft played out the exact way SSG wanted it to, and this is actually one of those moments. He goes big baby, it does not matter.
Yeah, and I think, there's been a long conversation, and maybe if we see it in the second set of the day, it's something we'll be able to dive more into, around this warrior in the jungle. We've seen, I feel like, it do great things, and then it kind of falls flat in some moments, and it's the latter here maybe for the Knights, but a lot of great to build on for SSG, and with that, Gore, they kind of complete this big turnaround, and you make the argument maybe that they're playing like tied for first in the league.
Yeah, and honestly, you had highlighted that coming into this set, but now depending on how Rival perform in their next set, they could very much actually tie this up. If Rival end up losing it, they go down to 7-3. Of course, if Rival win and they're 8-2, then hey, boo-hoo, you're still second place in an incredibly close league, which is incredible from them. So I think SSG have maybe had one of the biggest turnarounds. Obviously, Obey being able to win a set, there's still a huge conversation to be had down there, but they haven't been able to do anything in terms of climbing up in the ladder. Knights have done well, but they've gone from 7th to 5th now. SSG were having a really rough start to this phase, and now the fact that they are up there knocking down some of these top teams and everyone who was giving them trouble the first time around, there's someone that you have to fear and be really worried about from week to week.
And that is Sanguine and Rival, who will round out Week 7 here in the SPL. I love that about SSG, though. Now a 4-game winning streak for this squad. And, I don't necessarily want to bring up Radiance because they're not playing here, but it's kind of been the opposite swap there, where SSG start off a little bit slower and really have started to get those gears turning. This SSG team, they look near unstoppable at the moment. We'll jump down to an interview with Raffer and see if he agrees.
Thanks, Dulce. I do indeed have the support for Space Station here with me. And Raffer, man, I got to ask first and foremost about that purple buff steal in Game 3, because I feel like that pressure that you guys get over there really sets you all up. How often do you expect your Yamoja in the 1v2 up against Hog to be able to come away successful there?
Yeah, man, definitely just feels great that you can just go in 1v2 and just absolutely pop them. I did have issues with lag at the time, but I came on top in the end, so it was great.
That's right. I don't know if our fans know, but you just DC'd almost immediately after that and had to reconnect back to the match. Well, you guys have been on a hot streak here lately. What do you attribute this turnaround success for your roster to? Have you guys made some changes behind the scenes?
Yeah, we have Funball controlling Vote's computer now. No, I'm just trolling. But seriously, we had a few team talks. We've been improving. We've just been working on ourselves, you know, and as a team too. And I feel that it's just all coming together to pieces, and hopefully we can bring it together for MSI.
Well, hey, you all, if you can get that first seed or at least tie for it, depending on how that Sanguine rival set goes at the end of the week, you all rooting for anybody in particular there at that matchup, or how does the squad feel about that one?
I'm not too particularly bothered. I don't care who wins. I just want to qualify for MSI and win that. That's the long-term picture, because you see, like in Game 3, that's how I want us to perform every time. Because we went into that game just like, hi, we're not here to waste your time. And we just absolutely popped off.
Yeah, I think it was the cleanest game we've seen from you all so far this season. I got to agree with you with that one, Raffer. Look forward to those next matches and hopefully a strong MSI performance for you as well. But we still have another set to go here today. Fans out there, do not go anywhere. Make sure you're right back here for that last set.